Hello, guys.
Evening all. Let me just get my camera on.
How is it better for me to use AirPods or just speak like this? How's the sound?
Your sound is absolutely perfect.
Perfect.
You know, not so many people think you're perfect, but apparently your patients and me, we're the only two.
Brilliant. I'm happy. It's the first time.
So, Matt, we drew you away from your family and we stuck you into your medical practice on a Sunday evening.
It's good. We got to do it. Got to look for parcels. I know my kids will make a noise, so it's safer. How's it, Pat?
Hello,
Hey, Pat.
everybody. How's it
Hey,
going?
ooh,
Good.
you've got a terrible echo there. How? Let's try reduce your microphone or something, but we need
Let
to
me
do
see
something
something
with
here.
that.
Hold on.
Okay. I that's my sense is you're probably on AirPods, and that could be your problem. Exactly.
How is that?
Much better.
Is
Now
that
you're
better?
sounding almost human.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, sometimes these they work really nicely and sometimes they don't. I can't get the audio to ever be perfect with these things.
Okay. So Pat, very seldom have I seen such interest in a webinar as we have this evening. I mean, we've had thousands and thousands of people who've registered, pre-registered already for the webinar, but everyone is talking about it. And wherever I go, people stop me and they want to talk about what they're going to hear tonight. And of course, my response is, well, why don't you watch the show? We have experts on. Don't talk to me. I'm not a doctor.
I
Uh,
think everyone who's joined can already see what's going on.
Yes, of course we're live. We have on Zoom 181 people watching on Zoom already. We have many people watching on YouTube and Facebook this evening, and we're going to be broadcasting across all of those three channels. But before we go live, fully live at 7 o'clock tonight, what we like to do is just have a little pre chat and find out how people are doing and what their lives are like, and getting everyone comfortable and used to spending an evening in our company.
No pressure.
No pressure. There's never
Well,
any
the good thing
pressure.
is
This
that
is
only we can talk right now.
exactly. Well, for those people who have tuned in, if you do want to comment or question, you've got a chat section in front of you, and we love to know a few things, especially where you're watching in the world. That's one of the things we love to do because this really is international, and it's quite amazing sometimes where people tell us where they're watching from. And we often look at, because Zoom tells us and YouTube tells us, but we have followers in places like Panama and Costa Rica. Bangkok, there are always a few people watching us in Bangkok. We have lots of people who watch us in Netherlands. So let's just do a test to make sure that people can actually chat with us, because I've turned on all the chatting facilities. So I can see that we have Bernice is busy watching us from Port Elizabeth. And Kimmy K says, hi, Howie and Docs. It's Kimmy K from SA. And we have someone watching from Edinburgh, and Lynette and Alan, and Rochelle is in Derbs. So you see, guys, I've turned you into international medical superstars.
No pressure.
When do we get our own channel? That's all we need to find out, Matt. We've got
Well,
to,
Exactly.
Pat,
and I
let's
think we
talk about
can.
that, because you started a channel and then you kind of dissipated.
Sure, Howie, I tell you what, it's a lot, you make it look easy. From my side, it's very hard to consistently post items throughout the week that remain sort of let's say current, because I think things are evolving so rapidly. So you can try and, batch content and things together, but I find that things are they're so rapidly progressing within the space that actually you need to be filming it almost all the time. So I put a task to myself to do one every day. And I managed that for the period of about 30 days, 20 days, 25 days, somewhere around there. Then I completely buckled. So we're getting back on the horse though soon. So there'll be more webinars coming as well, which I'll be starting within the next coming months. And a lot of other content as well that we'll be doing. So yeah, I'd
So
say stay tuned.
not to pressurize you guys, but you have Professor Celine Bernstein from Morningside in Santon who's busy watching you. You have Dr. Howard Chait, who's a GP in Cape Town, who's busy watching you with a special interest in obesity and chronic disease. And then we have, for example, people like Ellen in London. So a lot of the medical profession are turning in. But Matt, one of the things is we struggle to try find experts in the field of peptides, in particular in South Africa. And we wanted to keep this as local as possible, but it's not easy to find people like yourself who have a very working day, hands-on knowledge and experience in that field. Is it because it's too new, or is it because kind of it's not something that's been taught in medical school? Why do you think that it's a field that maybe still needs a lot of work and a lot of people trained in?
So I think most of the training that we receive in South Africa, we never got taught in peptides. Even in terms of the GLP-1s, they've only been around for the last couple of years. I mean, Manjaro, we only got access to last year. So I think a lot of it is just lack of training and availability. I think a lot of the local guys, I mean, for me, I go overseas at least twice a year to international conferences to attend and learn from experts all over the world and to network. So I think it's just an enormous, it's one of those things, if it is your interest, you'll go and make the time and do it. But I think a lot of people are a bit nervous. And I think later we're going to sort of explore the legalities of peptide prescription. But I think a lot of practitioners are not keen until it's tried and tested and absolutely SAPA approved. I think a lot of doctors are going to steer very clear of this space out of fear.
Out of fear, and because, some things will never ever be regulated. And
Correct.
We'll talk about incentives a little later. Just by the way, Dave Pearlstein is 39,000 feet in the air on his way to Hong Kong. I'm so happy he's got better internet in his flight than maybe some of us do in Joburg. Stephanie's in Cape Town, and it says, "Hi, Morris from Cape Town." So that's Morris Kessler. So hi, Morris, welcome, and nice to have you on board. We, for those people who've tuned in earlier, are going to go live officially in about 7 minutes' time. And until then, we're just busy shooting the breeze, finding out how everyone's weekend was, find out if people are surviving the brutality of a Joburg winter, which I think was about 20 degrees today. And as a friend said to me, his son's in Amsterdam. It's the middle of summer, and they had a great summer's day, and it was 17. You gotta love Joburg winters.
So, completely agree. I think, listen, Howie, we might have to bring up, as we do have 7 minutes to kill here, we might need to talk a little bit about our Bafana performance and how we're collecting cards already on the field. I think it's a very topical thing at the moment in this moment in time, but a bit disappointing. Hey, what did you guys feel? Did you watch the game?
I watched the game, and so the highlight for me, and I've done a reel, I don't know if you know, I do social media, 2 to 3 minute reels all across, and my latest one, which I posted today, is in fact of the Bafana game, and the highlight for me was the flag bearer who tripped and went tumbling around the field. And then I did a part on the chewing gum that we chewed, on the red cards, on the goals.
Oh, the chewing gum.
That,
amazing.
You would think we had beaten that out of people at school, but apparently not so much. But that was a proper disastrous experience. I tweeted out in the middle of it, can I go to bed now, or do I have to wait for the rest of this humiliation?
No, I just love, the beautiful thing of social media is how quickly these things can get picked up. And the chewing gum, my word, that just blew across social media. I mean, he was on the floor rolling, his chewing gum was halfway in the grass, and he was still chewing it. He was committed to that thing. Hey, if there's anything,
I tell you,
you've got to admire his commitment to the cause.
And the referee, when he was trying to explain why he was giving red cards, no one could work out a word of what the guy was saying.
Yeah, no, thoroughly entertaining. I mean, even the opening ceremony was also a class act in many ways as well. Lots of lip syncing and a bunch of other funny stuff that happened in there. I don't know if you caught that.
No, I didn't watch the opening ceremony, but I think back to 2010 and what was one of the greatest months, I think, in South African history, as we all went and just partied for a full month and went to every game that we could. And I went to Rustenburg to games, and like the strangest places I was traveling to games, and I must say I miss it dearly. But before we ask Matthew what he thought of the opening game. Let's just check in with a few people who've said hello. Ash and Sabs, nice to have you on again. And Maurice says another excellent show. Well, Maurice, you don't know yet. We still have to prove ourselves this evening. And we have Charlotte, who's busy watching us in the Netherlands. Carol, who's at Potter's Barn. Jackie Joffe is in Plettenberg Bay. Jeff Rothschilds is Johannesburg. It's nice to have at least one person in Johannesburg actually watching. Levo is in Joburg. And Merle says it's a cold Cape Town out there. And we have Janess. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just my computer isn't bright enough. We have Merle in Cape Town. Anesia is in Johannesburg. Jessica Schwartzman, it says hi everyone, and we have Ruth in Scotland. Ruth, I think Scotland are playing. Did they play today, or are they going to play today? I think there's a Scottish game today. Pat, my sense is you following this closely.
It's been a while. So the final one was obviously I've got a bit more interest in that. I must admit, over the weekend it's been a bit crazy, so I haven't had an opportunity to actually look at the games. But I do see Brazil drew to Chile, or who did they play? Costa Rica? Or, I forget who they were, but they had a draw quite early on in the game, and that's quite not great for them.
So Yvonne is telling us she's watching the Comrades.
Luckily, I have access to internet.
Yvonne tells us she's watching the Comrades from Texas, which is amazing. And Ruth said Scotland played yesterday and won, which is fantastic news. Morocco drew with Brazil, says Dr. Russell Stock.
It was Morocco, yes, that's it.
And
Morocco versus Brazil.
And we have Kelly says hi from Cape Town, and we've got Bernice in Randburg. That's exotic. Iris, hi from Johannesburg. Lynn is in Dallas, Texas. Iris is in Joburg, and Lynn Kirsch is also in Dallas, Texas, and I think Phil is in London. So with that, we've got about 2 minutes before we begin. We're going to be full. If you know anyone who's watching this evening and they can't get in, please just send them over to YouTube, because we have unlimited licenses on YouTube. But we've had thousands and thousands of people who've signed up for this evening, because this is certainly a topic that has drawn a lot of attention. Have any of you been out for dinner in the last year where someone hasn't wanted to discuss either weight loss drugs or peptides with either of you?
Very rare.
Very rare, especially when they find out what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So just tell me, what do you guys do when you're out socially and someone comes and asks for medical advice? How do you politely tell them to go away?
It's a big challenge, Howard. I think the key is you have to be very, very sensitive to their needs. That's the one thing. Sometimes you have to play a little bit dumb, but certainly you can't ask the right questions in a public forum. And if you really want to do it properly, you actually have to take history. And I think a lot of people don't want to disclose at the dinner how they actually feel or what's really going on. So that, I think, is the big thing. Yeah. Always encourage.
Do people still do it though?
All the time. All the time. Or just a request, just hook me up. Like even today, 3 people messaged me, "Hi Matt, can you get me XY peptide?" No, like you're not my patient. All the time. Absolutely.
So I just, on a slightly different topic, on Monday evening am checking in for a sleep study. I'm convinced I don't sleep well. And so on Monday evening, I'm checking into the Sleep Health Center, and I believe they're going to wire me up, and they're going to watch me while I sleep, and they'll tell me how to sleep better. But I explained to them, I have never in my entire life woken up in any morning in my entire life and felt fresh and refreshed. And so I'm hoping that somehow they will change that for me on Monday evening. Have either of you ever done a sleep study?
No.
No, I haven't. I can only imagine, though, that the results are probably going to be a little bit skewed when you're completely wired up and someone's watching you sleep. But other than that, I think it's extremely valuable. At least you get an idea of, I think everyone tries to use these wearables as kind of the North Star in terms of tracking a lot of bits and pieces. And the fact is, especially with sleep, they're absolutely horrendous if anyone hasn't learned. So it's a nice thing to have an actual proper sleep study done if you are worried about it. So yeah, let us know on your socials in a 6 second reel how it went.
I
What
so
was
I
your
w-
choice, Howard? What was
sorry.
your choice? Because you can do it remotely. Why go
No, no,
in?
I want the real thing. I want them to
Okay.
put probes everywhere.
All right. I mean, there
I
are ways for them to do it remotely. So some of the
correct.
guys can send you a little pack. They'll send it to you, and even as an introductory sort of test, you stick a couple of electrodes on your chest, put a little probe on your finger, and it will monitor the way you sleep. So you don't always have to go in. Just for people who are watching, a sleep study can now be done remotely at home.
I wore an Aura ring once, and it told me I slept perfectly. Some of the best sleep it's told me it had ever seen in its life. I woke up feeling terrible, but and uh, and I've just ordered from America. It just arrived this week, although I haven't put it on yet. The new Google Fitbit Air, which
Yeah,
hopefully
Oh,
will be
nice.
very interesting.
monitoring my sleep as well. I have no idea what any of these things mean, but it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't give them a try.
We can help you.
Thank you. So, with that, the time has just gone 7 p.m. and a big welcome to everyone who's watching us around the world. It's such a great pleasure to have such a large audience this evening. We're broadcasting tonight on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. If you know anyone who's trying to get into Zoom and is unable to get into the program because we're full, please ask them to move across to YouTube or to Facebook. We're apologies, we can only have 1,000 concurrent people on Zoom at any point in time, but we have unlimited numbers of people who can watch us on YouTube. So if you do know anyone who's struggling to get in, please ask them to move across to YouTube. We've got an amazing program this evening, and it is clearly unbelievably relevant and topical because the number of emails, both complaints and excitement that we've received this evening is quite amazing. We've had doctors who really want to be on the show with our two guests this evening. We have doctors who think that they should rather be on the show than some of our guests. I've had gym trainers who are telling me that the doctors know nothing. The gym trainers know a lot about it. I believe there's some people who are eyebrow ladies who think they're the specialists this evening. But we're going to be going across two main fields. The field of peptides, which is a relatively new field in medicine. We're going to be examining what they are, and they fit into almost two categories. The one are weight loss peptides. You would have heard of things like Ozempic and Mounjaro and retatrutide. They are kind of fit into the weight loss category, and then there is a myriad of additional compounds. Some of them may be safe, some of them may be dangerous, but whatever happens, you have to be educated on the subject. So before we begin, this is the 195th webinar brought to you by the South African Jewish Report. You'll remember we started at the beginning of COVID, and it has been such a pleasure to be watched about 7 or 8 million times by people as we've brought you amazing stories, amazing medical advice, and stories about our community, stories about politics. You'll remember that the last one we did was in fact with Helen Ziller, and we'll tell you about what the next one's going to be. But don't forget, these are brought to you by the South African Jewish Report. And if Gilana can throw onto the screen the latest edition of the newspaper, of course, we distribute free of charge in about 242 locations around South Africa. We're just waiting for that top little black thing to disappear. Gilana, you've gone one forward, if you can just go back. And headlines this week is a South African immigrant in Israel who just very narrowly dodged a bullet on his birthday in a terrorist attack in Israel. It's an amazing story. Go pick up your hard copy of the SA Jewish Report. As I mentioned, we distribute in about 242 locations around the country. And where can you get it? Because we're all over the place. Well, you can go to Kosher World or Checkers or Exclusive Books or Discam, Pick and Pay, Spar, your dry cleaners, Thrups, your schools, your butcheries, your shuls, your bakeries. We're absolutely everywhere. We distribute online on a Wednesday evening, but we'll go live with our hard copy edition on a Thursday morning. So please go pick up your copy. But if you can't get hold of a hard copy edition, don't forget, you can always go onto our website, sajr.co.za. There you can download the entire edition, or alternatively, you can go and read each individual article as well. But as we've moved into the digital world, we also have 3 newsletters that we send out every single week. So we have a database of about 38,000 people. We send out 3 newsletters to each of those 38,000 people. Our open rates are by far the biggest of any media house in all of South Africa. And so it's clear that we're providing information to people that is relevant and important to them. If you are not on our mailing list for our newsletter, I urge you, please go click on the link that you see on the screen at the moment. It's bit.ly/SAJR inbox. Let me do that again. bit.ly with a dot between the bit and the /SAJR inbox. No capital letters. If you do that, you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter and have free of charge delivered to you 3 times a week, our digital newsletter. Don't forget as well, I said this was the 195th webinar. Our webinars are all available on the SA Juice Report SAJR website. You can go and click on the webinar button. Alternatively, you can always go onto YouTube, and all of our webinars are on YouTube as well. And we found that while thousands and thousands of people watch us live, many more people come back over the weeks that follow to actually watch the webinars either again or they've referred them to other people. So if you find tonight's webinar interesting, please go do that. For everyone who's busy watching us on YouTube, we have only one favor to ask of you. Please click the like and subscribe button. We've got nearly 11,000 people who subscribe to our channel, but it is really much easier for us to communicate with you if you just click that like and subscribe button. We don't ask much of you, but we do ask that if you're watching on YouTube. And then finally, just before we begin, if we click over to our next slide, you will see that our next webinar is actually on Tuesday the 23rd. We have Israel's top political analyst and journalist, Amit Siegel. We're doing this in proud partnership with the South African Zionist Federation, and we are actually going to be interviewing him. He's the writer of something called a Call at 4 a.m., but he also runs a show on television called Meet the Press, and we're going to be interviewing about what's happening with the Iran deal, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Gaza at the moment, and we're going to delve deep into what's happening in Israel prior to the Israeli elections, which are coming up in a few months' time. So please diarize now. We'll send out the adverts in the week. Tuesday, the 23rd of June. It's going to be slightly earlier than normal at 6 p.m. in the evening because he has to go on television shortly thereafter. But that's going to be an unmissable webinar. We have one piece of advice for you. We'll then give you the advice after this, seeing we were supposed to give you the advice before. So tonight's broadcast is in fact brought to you by Skyfans. For the last 29 years, Skyfans set out to create something absolutely beautiful and different. A simple, handcrafted ceiling fan. After countless late nights and careful designs, the award-winning original paddle fan was born. With hand-turned hardwood and timeless style, it's been elevating elegant homes since 1998. Skyfans is where craftsmanship meets performance. And we're so grateful to Skyfans for joining us this evening and for sponsoring tonight's event. So that piece of advice that was supposed to be before, which we hope to be that Gilana shows us now. I don't know what Gilana is doing there, but we're telling you that the information that you're about to receive this evening is not medical advice. We're going to be having some very interesting and informative discussions, but this is for information purposes only. Right through the week, people have been sending me questions to ask about what peptide they shall be using. And as I've said to them, I'm not a medical doctor. We will have medical doctors on, but they're not your doctors. Please always consult with your own medical doctor before embarking on any health journey. So with that, let me introduce you to two remarkable doctors who've joined us this evening. We have with us Dr. Matthew O'Reilly and Dr. Patrick Bennett. Pat, tell us first, where do you practice? What is your area of expertise?
Howie, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to this evening. I think it's a lot of very interesting and very topical things, and we can cut through a lot of, I think, a lot of the horrible kind of, I guess, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook sort of information, and give sort of more credible, hard, evidence-based things for medicine. So I'm based in Victory Park. That's where I'm physically based, but however, my practices are completely virtual. I founded a company called Flourish, and what we do is we specialize in GLP-1 and weight loss for patients suffering with overweight and obesity. And specifically, what we've done is design a program, and where I sort of specialize in is designing a program around GLP-1s to try and make sure that whatever you're doing is sustainable in the long run, so that all the effort that you're doing actually makes sense for the patient at the end of the day.
And Matt, your practice is slightly different to your average GP. I'm not going to come to you with colds and flu, am I?
Definitely not. From my side, I run two practices. I have my main practice in Santon. My interest is in occupational medicine. We look after a lot of corporate execs, business leaders, CEOs, and we look at how do we optimize them? How do we optimize them for peak performance? I also have a practice at the Joburg Academic Urology Centre at Sunninghill, near Sunninghill. And the interest there is to look at hormone optimization, working with 7 urologists, 2 medical oncologists, and 2 radiation oncologists. So it's quite a diverse set of spectrum of patients, but certainly not your average colds and flus.
So in your standard practice in Santon, what sort of patient arrives at your doors?
It can be a bit of a spectrum. The most common patient is your sort of senior executive looking to optimize. How do we optimize everything from body composition? How do we optimize from a recovery perspective, endurance, aesthetic perspective in terms of weight loss, building muscle? How do we improve their sleep? Depends on what they want. Erectile dysfunction, sexual function. The spectrum is enormous. And then we would look at optimizing them from a diet perspective, optimizing their exercise, using peptides, whether it's the weight loss drugs or the other ones that we're going to discuss tonight, and then also looking at hormones for both men and women. And we would then pull on all 4 levers of health to then optimize these patients.
So before I start asking you questions, I want to remind everyone who's watching us this evening, whether you're on Zoom, Facebook, or on Instagram, we want you to be part of the conversation as well. So please use the chat function on any of those platforms, and we'll make sure that we bring all of those things across. A few people are telling me that the sound is really quiet or very soft. We don't control that. That's a Zoom thing. So if on Zoom the sound is quiet, swap over please to YouTube. But we're on maximum broadcast sound on our side. So to our panelists, this idea of biohacking has suddenly become so important. We used to go to our doctors for lots of advice. We now seem to go to the Instagram or TikTok. We're watching people and we're taking responsibility and control of our own health. And we're watching all of these scientists, sometimes professors, sometimes real doctors, sometimes chiropractors, and sometimes the gym dudes. And we're taking advice from them. Matt, let's start with you. How do you think this biohacking thing began?
I think there are many, many causes of this. I think the leading cause is a lot of people after COVID have been disillusioned by general allopathic medicine. And I think whether through good or bad, unfortunately, the pandemic has left a very bad image on general allopathic medicine in the eyes of most people. So I think people are turning to alternative strategies, whether it's peptides, biohacking, and they really want to try and take control for themselves. I think this has also been accelerated by social media. I think the advent, of social media, the access to information, just because someone has 1 million followers doesn't mean that the medical advice that they're giving is correct. It just means that the algorithm is promoting and promoting. It doesn't mean that it's correct or not. And then I think the other caveat here is I think there's a tremendous pressure which we have to be empathic to our patients, in that there's a tremendous, particularly in my patient population, that we want this lean, mean, fit image. If I look at someone like Adrian Gore's successor, the new leader of Discovery Health, is going to run marathons. They're going to be lean. They're not going to have a book. They're going to be this fit together person. And most of sort of general corporate out there want this lean, mean image. And as people age, it's becoming harder and harder to maintain that standard, particularly working in a corporate environment where time is so limited. We're working 16 hours a day. How do we balance that and how do we optimize them? So I think it's very multifactorial. There's a reason why in 2023 Jimmy Kimmel opened the Oscars, and I mean, although he was joking, I don't think it's product placement, but his words was, as I look around the room, I have to consider, is Ozempic for me? There's a reason that he's saying that. It's very topical. And I think it's just with the advent of social media, we just, there's more information, more access to AI. So yeah, I think it's definitely there.
Are you seeing amongst your clients that people are willing to move away from evidence-based medicine to something that's maybe much more experimental?
Yes, very much so, particularly because they feel that they can control it. And often because they've done their research, because they've spent 4 hours on Instagram reading and watching reels, they feel that they're now competent to make these decisions, which may or may not be the truth, unfortunately.
So, Patrick, is this the cutting edge of medicine?
I think, well, cutting edge is one side. I think it's where everything has been pushing us in terms of direction. So if you look at, I mean, if you put any drug out there on the shelves that will make anyone, let's say we find one that'll, I think we'll talk about them, that can make you more tanned, or that can make you more attractive, or that can do those drugs are going to fly off of the shelves. So, we're seeing a kind of a push towards that sort of general genre. And this was just, these GLP-1 medications were a happenstance that happened off the back of a diabetes medication. And since then, we've seen how powerful that these can be. And I think we were always, there've been multitudes of attempts at weight loss medications targeting different types of, mostly stimulants and the rest of it. Nothing has done what this has done, and is continuing to do, and also is seeming to have more and more positive or interesting side effects or other sort of things happening. So it's been fortunate that we found them, and they've sort of, or whether we found the use for them, let's put it that way, in terms of treating obesity and overweight. But we're starting to find more and more benefits that are attached to them. So I think they're extremely interesting. And I think this is if you look at the pipeline, there's about 193 obesity drugs, oral, injectable, monthly, maybe even yearly. We'll have to see how it goes. But this is something that's definitely going to be at the forefront for a long time.
So do people walk into either of your practice and start a conversation with, my gym trainer says?
Every day.
Matt, I think you're deep in this realm.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally every single day. No, I'm here I really want peptides. I hear about peptides, I want peptides. And I think, when people come in and the first question when they tell me they want peptides, it's actually something that we've just got to double click on. They don't really want peptides. They actually want to discuss their fatigue. They want to discuss their poor recovery. They want to discuss why their sexual function isn't where it is. They want to discuss why they can't lose weight the way they used to. Why, no matter what they do, they still feel tired. Why are they falling asleep in the afternoon Zoom? Why can't they recover? They've trained and trained. They've always been able to do this amount of training, gym 5 days a week, play a round of golf on a Sunday, and suddenly they can't. And I think people, A, because we're living much longer, and B, because we really want to continue the quality of life that we have, I think people are really asking questions. So there's a general desire out there for answers.
So let's kind of dive into this peptide craze. And it really is a craze. And probably the most well-known peptide that exists out there is insulin. Patrick, tell us about insulin. That's kind of the one that everyone knows. They just don't realize it's a peptide.
Yeah, I think this is also quite interesting, is how peptides become quite a buzzword and no one actually knows what it means, but it's kind of become this buzzword for something that you can inject that will do magic in the body. And I think in some cases there's some evidence to that, but the fact that it's just actually a class of drugs, it's a bunch of amino acids. So it's a chain or a string of amino acids, and the most famous one is insulin. I mean, we've had that for a multitude of years, and we initially synthesized that from the pancreas of pigs, and then that became a treatment for that we could start to use that would cure and sometimes prevent a lot of deaths within patients with diabetes. And that's widely used. So everyone understands, everyone knows insulin quite well. And then we've had these are just recent sort of advents and additions to this class of medications in the form of GLP-1s, GIPs, and the glucagon receptors, so the dual and triple receptor agonists. So all of those have kind of been additions, and I think off of the back of those being peptides, then we started to see a big uptick in a lot of these other, and I think those also made injectables quite a lot more, I wouldn't say fashionable, but let's say more acceptable or more socially acceptable and easier to understand. Whereas before, I think if someone was on an insulin, no one wanted injectables. If you told them, sorry, we might have to move you to insulin, if you told the patient that it was the end of the world. So I think it's changed to that, and then that opened up the whole realm of these other sort of peptides or signaling molecules that work within the body. And I think that's where we're finding ourselves now, is this massive class that's existed for years, and it's just a class, but there's become a bit more of a buzzword, and it's good to understand where that all comes from.
So the second set, maybe most famous, are what we call GLP-1s. We're going to go into them in details in a few minutes, but what names would we recognize as GLP-1s, and what are they used for?
So we'll know Ozempic and Wegovy locally, and those are GLP-1, those are single receptors, so they act upon the GLP-1 receptor only. Wegovy was only recently introduced at the end of last year, and that is the weight loss form of Ozempic. So pretty much it's the exact same molecules called semaglutide. And that acts on various regions of the body in order to get the effects. And those regions we'll delve into a little bit later, but basically brain, gut, and then they've got a lot of other effects within the cardiovascular, the heart and blood vessels, which are actually all beneficial as well. And then obviously the main one that was actually seen was the control of insulin and blood sugar. So that's broadly the GLP-1 class that we've currently got. And then we've started adding more and more receptors onto that as we go.
So let's talk about this thing. The one question that we have that keeps on coming up, and to both our panelists, many of these peptides fit into a number of different categories. So some are approved by regulators, and we talk about FDA and SAHPRA, and who are these people, and what is their role in approving drugs. And some of them are approved but are used what is called off-label, not for the reason they were originally approved or intended. And there are some that are approved in certain jurisdictions, maybe in Europe but not the United States, maybe in South Africa, not in Europe. And that there are some that are not approved by anyone, but then there are many things that have never passed through any approval rating. Matt, maybe you can talk us through some of those options.
So I think if we look at sort of the general GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, that's the same drug, semaglutide is in it, and Mounjaro, these are approved by the FDA and SAHPRA. They have done, the people who make them, whether it's Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, they have done something called randomized control trials. So they have done very deep scientific research to validate the efficacy of these drugs for both the management of diabetes and weight loss. They're highly effective. They've proven very widely that they're effective. The challenge with the randomized control trials is that they're enormously expensive to run. And that really leads to the second class of peptides, something like a BPC-157, a TB-500. Because these are not patentable, and because the drug companies can't own them and can't block other manufacturers from making them, the availability of randomized control trial data is extremely limited. And this is where we run into an area of what level of evidence are we going to use to then decide whether we should give a patient a treatment or not. And this is really where the challenge of peptides come in. What level of evidence are we actually going to accept to use them? And I think it's going to be very interesting to see where the future of medical evidence goes. If we look at companies like Benevolent AI, they're now using AI to repurpose drugs. So we're going to use AI to then figure out where it goes. This is not based on randomized control trial data. And again, it's using, I would use the word signal. You've got to understand as a doctor and as a patient, what is the quality of evidence that you would accept to use a drug in your body, whether injectable or oral or on your skin as a cream. What level of evidence would you accept? And I use the word signal because The challenge here is we are not going to get randomized control trial data for most of the peptides because of the funding. And hopefully at some point we will. And I think in July, it's going to be very interesting to look how the Americans, particularly RFK, who's the Secretary of Health in the USA, looks at reevaluating where most of these peptides fit. And I think just to categorize there's a lot of data, or there's a lot of stuff on Instagram for the viewers. They talk about in the USA category 1 and category 2 peptides. So category 1, this is really relating to the compounding, to the manufacture by compounding pharmacies of peptides. Compounding category 1 are safe. The Americans will allow compounding pharmacies to make them. Category 2, the FDA says, are not safe. And most of these peptides in 2023 were moved to this category 2 list. And a lot of opinion in the world sits that this was a political move. I'm not going to go into American politics, but the data in terms of the safety, a lot of people would argue that the safety data wasn't there. It was more a move by Big Pharma to limit the use of these peptides by limiting the production. But just because it's a category 1 or a category 2 peptide doesn't mean it's safe for human use. And this is where we've got to understand. And even sort of in preparing for this talk, if we look at category 2 drugs in the USA, there's a drug called domperidone. You might have heard it's called Metilium, Vomidon. In South Africa, this drug is widely available. You could walk into Discom this morning. I could write you a script for it right now. No medical liability insurer would ever question my use of it. In the USA, it is a category 2 drug. It is banned. The compounding pharmacies cannot even produce it. So again, it's about jurisdictions and where you lie and who you want to listen to. And it becomes very difficult for patients to understand what is the quality of evidence that they're willing to use. I'll use an example. I'll show you a screenshot. This was released last week. Very, very, very interesting. I'm going to share my screen to show you something. I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see this American College of Oncology? American Society
it's a
of
little
Oncology.
small, but we can see.
So if you look at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, last week they put out a press release and they said the GLP-1 receptor agonists, so things like Ozempic and Mounjaro, may reduce the risk of obesity-related cancers. And they said overall cancer was reduced by 41% and even larger reductions in certain subgroups, including men, where the risk dropped by 70%. Now, this is a signal. What does that mean? That means this is a society who are saying that these drugs are reducing the risk. Does this mean that every single obese patient should be on a GLP-1 to reduce their risk of cancer? No. But it's a really good signal. And if we had enough societies, eventually this noise would get louder. And this is where we can use, this is a really good example to explain the use of something like BPC 157. Because there are lots of societies out there and lots of doctors with lots of clinical experience who are saying using something like BPC 157, for example, for a torn tendon, a knee injury, is a really good idea. But there are no randomized controlled trials. And these drugs
So let's ask that question. Why are there no randomized controlled trials?
Cost.
So who normally pays, and why is someone not doing randomized trials on most of these peptides?
So I think, we have to understand the tremendous, enormous expense that these drug companies use to validate the efficacy of their medication. And really, we must protect these drug companies. I cannot say it louder. We must protect patents. We must allow these drug companies to have their patents and to continue to do research, because without them, we will never have access to things like Ozempic or Mounjaro. We'll never have it. Normal people will never, ever have the funding to do the trials. They're generally multi-center. You would have randomized controlling, which means some patients would actually get the drug, some patients would get a placebo. Generally, even the doctors involved in these trials wouldn't even know which injection was the active one and which one wasn't. And after years of collecting all this data and monitoring these patients, would we then take a scientific analysis of all the data and then work out whether these are efficacious or not? And it's cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And there's a whole bunch of sort of levels of staging in terms of safety and proving efficacy for certain bodies. And remember, it's an only...
I think it's important to make the point that it costs millions of dollars, but yet the peptides can't generally be patented.
Correct.
So there's no economic incentive for a drug company to spend billions of dollars to test a peptide if they can't make money out of it afterwards.
Correct.
And
using
In
something
fact,
like
in the United States, it's 40 amino acids. If you have less than 40 amino acids in your chain, you can't patent it. If you have more, you can. There's a big fight busy going on over a drug called retatrutide at the moment to try count how many amino acids in the chain, but they say there's about $1 trillion at stake, depending
more.
on whether you count
More.
39 or 41 amino acids in the retatrutide chain.
Correct. But remember, the trial they're discussing is only for weight loss. So when you talk about things like off-label, initially the trial data on Ozempic was for diabetes. They then had to run a whole bunch of other trials to then prove the efficacy in weight loss to get it approved. So if I wanted to use something, let's say an Ozempic, if I want to microdose it for, let's say, using it for pain management in, let's say, a chronic inflammatory condition, that is an off-label use. This is an off-label use which is not registered. And we do use the drugs at certain dosages to augment and manage those kind of conditions. Lots of emerging data using GLP-1s. I mean, the cancer is a great example for pain, depression, addiction. We don't have the data. Looking at Parkinson's, tremendous data coming out. There's some ophthalmology data coming out. Lots and lots of interesting use of these drugs, which are not approved. These are off-label uses. But because we know they're safe, we would then be allowed to use them in an off-label category.
So
And I think, sorry, just to jump in there, Matt, to back you up, there's also other drugs that, I mean, your GP will commonly prescribe that's used as off-label. So we've got anti-seizure medication, which we use for nerve-related pains. We've got a few examples of where this is happening because we know that these medications are safe to treat, epileptics. There's been a general sort of shift because we saw that it worked for pain, and then that's just something that's sort of happened over time. So it's not something that's unknown to the medical community and in terms of prescribing either.
Yeah,
So I want to jump into a minute into the weight loss section of tonight's discussion. But I want to emphasize, and maybe you guys can emphasize it, is number one, you always consult your doctor. When you embark on any of these things, you have to do it in consultation with your doctor. Second of all, your doctor's going to do baseline testing before you begin, and he's going to monitor you throughout your process. You can't do this with your gym trainer. You have to do it with your doctor. And then you need to make sure that you are doing this with certified, legitimate products. There are a lot of people importing by themselves of Temu and AliExpress. You have no idea what's in that vial, and you're injecting these things into your body. It's actually amazing that so many of the people who refuse to take a COVID vaccine, which came out of a legitimate testing program, have no problem whatsoever in injecting themselves with unknown, untested chemicals that they have no idea what's inside, that's coming in a package from China. That's not the way that you should be doing it. And the fourth element is you need to be monitored and checked. You need to understand the risks involved. You need to be educated in this entire program. No one is responsible for your body but yourself. So be responsible.
Correct.
But Patrick, let's start with you because you run a practice that specializes in weight loss. And if I am to believe many of the people that I see on Instagram, weight loss is very simple. It's an equation, calories in, calories out. If you have too many calories, you're fat. If you have fewer calories going in than coming out, you're thin. That's the understanding, I think, that many people who watch the screens on social media believe about weight loss. Is it that simple?
So I think the bold sort of overreaching statement is that if it were so simple, then everyone would have a six-pack, right? I think it's obviously far more complicated than that, and we've got multiple studies, we've got multiple data, we've got a lot that backs up that exact statement. But I think the best way to describe it is imagine being an accountant and trying to balance, you're balancing the two columns in your accounting book, but someone keeps shifting the numbers on the other side. And that's what's actually happening because it's not a perfect equation. Your body will adapt, it will change little bits and pieces, so your metabolism will drop, in response to some form of starvation. So basically, you're always chasing a constantly moving equation. So it simplifies it and it makes it easy to understand. And I think that makes it easy to translate to patients. But I want everyone to understand that, weight gain, obesity, and struggling with weight are genetic. A large portion of it is, 40 to 70% are genetic, epigenetic. It's a very complex condition. And there's multiple things that factor into it, not only just genetics, but you've got your environment, your psychology. There's so many different bits and pieces. It's so multifaceted that I think just to put it down to a basic this plus this equals that equation is just far too simple.
So let's talk about things like blood sugar levels and the impact that they have on weight loss and keeping weight off if you've been on a diet. First of all, do diets actually work?
So there are some diets that can work, and I think by far and large there's a whole bunch of there are many different names for many different diets, and you'll see eat according to your blood type, you'll see eat according to this, you'll see eat according to that. And by far and large, I mean, taking the average normal sort of patient who doesn't have, let's say allergies and dietary requirements and the rest of it, or some kind of medical condition, if you can put yourself in a calorie deficit and stay in a calorie deficit, it can work. But the problem is that a lot of patients are struggling with the counter forces that happen once you go into a calorie deficit. And some people have way worse, even just from a genetic standpoint, have a much harder time of dealing with that calorie deficit. So imagine, for example, you're trying to climb a mountain, and the guy next to you has got all the gear. He's got like the hiking poles, he's got the kind of little snowshoes or ice shoes, he's got the kit, he's warm, he's got the goggles, he's got everything, and he's going up this hill. There he goes. And you sitting there and you kind of got like, your flip-flops on and you're trying to make your way up this massive mountain and you got this massive headwind of, let's call it food noise that's kind of constantly pelting you. You're always going to struggle. So that you can't take two individuals and you see one person's weight loss journey and they have been in a diet and it all worked for them and they went really well. And the next person has just got this predisposition to have these hormones and these hunger hormones, these anti-fullness hormones, this constant hunger noise and food noise that's constantly bombarding them. That journey is never going to be the same. So to say by far and large diets are going to work for everybody is also, once again, just a blanket statement. I think it has to be far more nuanced than that.
So does everyone have the potential to be thin if they want? And everyone has a choice. You cannot want to be thin, but if someone does want to be thin, in the new world of the GLP-1s, does everyone have the ability to become thin or thinner?
I think there's a limit to what these medications can do, and how you're utilizing them. So, there's an upper limit to a lot of these in terms of percentages of body weight loss and the rest of it. It can do quite a bit for you, but there's a lot that you have to also bring yourself. And there's also the chance that there's around about a 50% chance for some of these medications that it might just not work for you. So it's difficult to know, whether these medications are going to do what they need to do for you. So to say by far and large, nowadays, anyone can be thin. No, I don't think that's the case. I think once again, there's a lot more nuance to that because the medications and the way that they act, especially within the brain and the body, are very different between two individuals. And how boring would it be if we were all just exactly the same photocopies throughout life? So I think that's very important that we acknowledge that everybody's different and will respond differently.
So let's talk about these new GLP-1s. Explain to us what they are. What's the difference between an Ozempic and a Wegovy and a Mounjaro and a Zepbound? What is demystify for us? What are all these things? How do you take them? And what effect would people expect to see as a result?
Good. So I think let's put them into two classes, essentially, to make things a lot easier for us. And they're two molecules largely two molecules that everyone's talking about. The older one, which I'm going to just mention, was liraglutide, which is Saxenda, which was being used and is still being used in some places for weight loss. That's a daily dosage, but obviously we've moved across to the weekly doses now, which is by far and large a lot easier for patients. So two major groups, right? We've got semaglutide and tirzepatide. Semaglutide, we've got Ozempic and Wegovy, which sit in there. Ozempic is the diabetic form. So that was the first one that came out in South Africa. And there's a lot of off-label use when that arrived as well, because it was already Wegovy was already FDA approved within the United States, but we hadn't got it SAPRA approved or semaglutide SAPRA approved yet. So once we got that SAPRA approved, it's now got a different name called Wegovy. So Wegovy is used for weight loss and Ozempic is used for diabetes, and that's in the semaglutide group. That's a once weekly injection. On the other side, we've got tirzepatide. Now that's currently under the version of Mounjaro, but it has also been approved for weight loss. The States has a version of Mounjaro called Zepbound, which is the weight loss version. So that is basically Zepbound is to Mounjaro what Wegovy is to Ozempic. Let's put it that way. You've got your Ozempic or Wegovy acts on only one receptor, and that's the GLP-1 receptor. And then you've got your tirzepatide, which acts on two receptors, which is your GLP-1 and your GIP receptors. And that's where things get really interesting. Your GLP-1 receptor works largely, especially when we're talking mostly about weight loss, works a lot within your brain, I think is where the greatest component works, where it works on a lot of appetite signals and fullness signals. So when I was talking about all these headwinds and someone without the gear, basically it's like walking up to that person who's trying to climb the mountain and be like, oh, here, buddy, here's the stuff that you were looking for. Here's your poles, here's your goggles. Here we go. Now go for it. It just basically makes things for individuals who have just genetically or environmentally, whatever it might be, a much harder time to lose that weight. It sort of evens the playing field. So it'll decrease that food noise. It'll decrease your hunger signals that usually in a lot of patients are, kind of really spike. It'll increase your ability to listen to your fullness signals, so your leptin. And it also acts within your hedonic centers. So it starts to change the type of foods that you actually want to eat. So a lot of your kind of dopamine inducing foods are the things like chocolates and takeaways and all these sort of things don't provide the same kind of kick that they usually do when they stimulate the brain. So you end up rather, you start feeling the effects and you'd rather just, eat a proper meal. So we're finding that that's actually changing a lot of the way that people eat. And I think by far and large, that's the most massive part of what these medications are doing. And secondly, they also slow down digestion and make you feel a little bit fuller for longer. So what they basically do is that when you are in this calorie deficit, they enable you to stay in this calorie deficit because you don't have all of these massive signals where your brain's constantly thinking about the fridge, thinking about what it's going to eat, thinking about that chocolate that you put behind the cookie jar, 2 days ago and tried to hide from yourself. All of that becomes a lot easier, and it just basically evens the playing field. So those are, from a weight loss perspective, a lot what the GLP-1 does. The GIP.
So can I just check and confirm my understanding is correct? Is they're not doing anything to your body, but they're just encouraging you to eat less and maybe eat better, so you will be in a calorie deficit and thereby lose weight. Is that my understanding correct?
So they do act on receptors within the brain and within the stomach. So they are acting on the body, but by far and large, they're making it much easier for individuals to stay in a calorie deficit because you are eating less. You are able to eat less and feel full because it's staying in your stomach for longer, and your brain is telling you that you full a little bit earlier than when some people might be overeating, for example. So yeah, in essence, it's the whole, if you wanted to look at the very basic in versus out equation, it starts to influence the in equation.
And how do I take this? Is this an injection that I stick into my body once a week? And is there an ich factor of people saying, I don't want to stick a needle into my body? Is there a pill equivalent?
I think there used to be a much bigger ick factor. I think people are a lot more accepting of injectables nowadays, especially because, they've made it very, very easy. So it comes in a little multi-dose pen form where you basically just click it to the dose that you want, and then there's a tiny little needle that attaches to the end of it, and then you inject it often within the stomach. So you'll kind of rotate where you inject it within the stomach, and that's just once a week. So a lot of patients, once they get over.
Is there a pill version of it?
So there is a pill version, Wegovy oral. Also Rybelsus, I think, is the diabetic version. So there's an oral Wegovy, which is launched in the United States. Not quite as effective. And there are a few caveats around how you have to take it. And it's a daily tablet as well. So that's something to bear in mind. But it might open up, these medications to a lot of people who would not consider something like an injectable.
So we're still talking about the Wegovy Ozempic side of the equation. What effects should I expect if I'm on it? How much of my body weight should I be able to lose if I'm on one of those?
So up to around about 15% body weight loss, total body weight loss is what the trials have shown us in terms of weight loss. And what you can expect really differs from patient to patient. It can be quite difficult to kind of give a blanket statement. What we do know is that by far and large, one of the biggest effects that a lot of patients will talk about quite early on is fullness. So the ability where they would previously kind of, eat a whole massive plate of food, they'll sort of leave food on the plate, which for them is something that, was not possible before. Whenever there was a plate of food, it was something they would just, completely finish from end to end. And then number two is a reduction in food noise. So that constant sort of, I don't know, they call it sort of food static within your brain that's constantly telling you, oh, you should eat, you should eat, you should eat. What about this? Oh, this is delicious. That's delicious. This is in your fridge. Remember these takeaways from 2 nights ago? That disappears. And that's probably the most early kind of positive effects that start to happen for a lot of people. And that's quite a game changer.
I'm cutting you short because we have so much to get through, but we've only touched on the Ozempic. Can we call that generation 1? And is Mounjaro generation 2? And what's different about it and what should we expect? And then after that, we're going to talk about what are the side effects that you can have if you go on these, both positive and I believe there are a lot, well, shall we start negative? And then I believe there are a lot of positive effects that we're now discovering as well. But let's first talk about Mounjaro. What is Mounjaro in comparison to Ozempic and Wegovy?
So Mounjaro, I would probably say is version 2, if you want to put it. It's a very different molecule, but basically it's added on another receptor, so the GIP receptor. And what we're seeing is that actually helps to, one, prevent a bit of nausea so that you can actually go up a bit higher in terms of a dose than you normally would. And then number 2, it's acting on different receptors within the brain to help with reduction in appetite as well. So once again, it's acting on those sort of hindbrain centers that control food and food want. And then it's got some other effects which are still being looked into, which is within it's something called leptin within your body that tells it how full it is. So it's basically, it helps to sensitize your body to that molecule, which is something that a lot of people with weight problems struggle with, is that they don't feel full and their body doesn't indicate that to them. And that we're looking at around about 23%, 22% weight loss, depending which trials you're looking at. So a lot more effective in terms of total body weight loss when you start adding on that GIP receptor. And what I found a lot better tolerated as well. Similar in terms of what it provides. So you've got the same sort of, positive effects as Ozempic, but we're seeing a better tolerability profile. So you're not getting as severe side effects and you're getting a bit better body weight loss. So that's why I'd probably consider that that's, kind of version 2 of where we're heading in terms of weight loss drugs.
So tell us about the side effects. First of all, the negative side effects. What are people experiencing? No drug is without its side effects. So if you're on Ozempic or Mounjaro, what should you expect? And does everyone get these side effects?
So not everyone gets these side effects, and it's impossible to predict. I think I've had a lot of patients say, which one should I start and which one's going to give me side effects? And I'll have to do this, because the truth is you never know. And that's the same thing with any drug that you start. You have no idea. That's how anaphylaxis, reactions or severe allergy reactions happen to medications, because you just have no idea until you start them. So you can't predict these things. But what you will tell them is that by far and large, the biggest sort of negative effects that these drugs have are around the GIT, so around your stomach and your tummy. And that usually revolves around things like nausea. You can have this thing called sulfur burps, which some patients complain about, reflux. You can have a bit of tummy cramps, runny tummy, constipation. So by far and large, the most highly reported side effects are around sort of gastrointestinal issues. But that being said, I have some patients who can start it and immediately will maybe have some nausea. I have some patients who start it and have absolutely nothing, no matter how high you go on the dose. So really, really depends. It's a little bit of a roll of the dice, but yeah, that's how medication works, unfortunately. Until we get to the point where we can take a blood test and do some, specific pharmacogenetics at one point in medicine, we have to rely on the try and see method for a lot of this.
So talk about the positive effects that maybe we weren't expecting. And then we've got quite a few questions that have come in that people want to know, for example, if they only want to lose 5 kilograms, is this the sort of thing to do? But talk about, we're now discovering the US Oncology Association had a major conference 2 weeks ago, and there were some unbelievable results from people who are on these GLP-1s in relating to restricting cancer growth. Run us through a few of the health benefits that we're actually seeing on these drugs.
Sure. So I think the by far and large, all of these can kind of be lumped down to one, or let's say two things: decreasing overall body inflammation. And I think we've seen that these GLP-1 molecules and the GIPs decrease inflammation throughout the body and especially within the blood vessels themselves. And I think a lot of the effects that we are seeing are related to that. That plus couple it with, improvement into your metabolic health because you're no longer carrying the excess weight and you don't have, let's say, insulin sensitivity problems and all these other little issues that might be creeping up. We're seeing a lot of positive effects. So we're seeing about a 20% decrease in events like heart attack and stroke with people on Wegovy at the highest dose. So I think that's something that was what the studies pointed out. So if you remain on, and that's independent of weight loss. So if you didn't lose the weight, and they actually found patients who even some patients who put on weight still had a 20% reduction in things like heart attacks and strokes, which I think is super, super significant. There was talk about the use within dementias as well, because there is a bit of, there's crossover between vascular dementias and Alzheimer's disease. And, a lot of those are a result of metabolic dishealth or metabolic illness. And that, by addressing not only the inflammatory part of it, but also the metabolic health, we're seeing improvements. But I don't think anything to write home about just yet. The data is still quite muddy at this point in time, and no positive signals are coming out of that. And then once again, cancer, a lot of it boils down to inflammation, and actually obesity itself is a risk factor for cancers. So it's no surprise there, once you start to lose the weight, once the inflammation goes down, this metabolic health that starts to ensue. The incidence of obesity-related cancers also drops. So I think there's a lot of positive, kind of things that are coming out of these molecules, provided that you're on them. That's in general a lot of the positive effects that we're seeing that are sort of off-label or let's just say incidental.
But you should be able to, certainly from what we know, cancer seems to have a positive indication on this in terms of restricting cancer growth. Heart, blood pressure, insulin levels, potentially some mental Alzheimer's issues relating to that. I see, for example, that someone has just mentioned that their psoriasis, it's been very helpful for their psoriasis before weight loss. But I want to just very quickly, before we go over to Matt, because Matt does have some concerns about some of the side effects of these. And just before we go over to them, who's the ideal person who should be going on one of these GLP-1s or GIP drugs? And Marion's question, she wants to lose 5 kilograms. Is this the sort of drug she should go on, or is that something for a diet?
It's a tough question to answer. I think there's a balance of like patient autonomy there, what patients should be able to choose for themselves in terms of treatment. But I think I'll give my opinion is that if you've got a patient who's struggling with obesity or overweight, and they've tried multiple different, and often these patients have tried everything, multiple different, they can name more diets than weekdays, and they've tried exercise, they've tried the whole basic move more, eat less type mentality, and that's never worked for them. This is by far and large something that they should look at considering. I think the caveat for me and something that really resonated is that if you're using the GLP-1s like a crash diet, you can expect the same results. So you are going to probably put the weight back on, and you're not going to do the hard work alongside it as well. So it's a patient who is looking to lose probably quite a significant amount of weight, and they're willing to do it over the long haul. So not over just, a 3-month period or a 6-month period. We're talking about a year to 2 years where they're going to dedicate themselves to not only taking the medication, but doing the hard work alongside it to make sure that the results, we get really good results. We do it safely, and you do it in a way that maintains the weight loss in the long run.
So Matt, if I can swap over to you, you have some concerns because it's not, whenever you go on diet, no matter what diet is, you lose some fat, but you also lose muscle weight. And that applies to these as well as anything else. What's your
100%.
concern relating to that?
I mean, I think so. We've skipped over a big concern is cost. We can't underestimate the cost of these drugs. They're enormously expensive. But from a medical perspective, minus the cost, my biggest challenge with these drugs is the trial data. The trial data, as Patrick beautifully articulates, is based on total body weight, total TBW, total body weight loss. And the challenge there is if I have a patient who's 120 kilos and we cut off 20 kilograms of weight, what did we remove? Did we remove muscle or did we remove fat? And using this diagram as an example, most people by the age of 20 have maximized their skeletal muscle mass. It's very hard from the age of 20 to then put on more muscle. The challenge there is now we go and prescribe some 20, 30, 40-year-old a GLP-1. They go on it. They don't optimize they don't optimize their diet, so they don't eat enough protein. They don't do the resistance-based training, and they don't optimize in terms of looking at hormone therapy. We will then see this tremendous loss of muscle. And this is the danger because when you stop these drugs, muscle is critically important for two big reasons. Number one is basal metabolic rate. And why is that so important? Because if I want to manipulate how much energy you can burn at rest when you sleep, I can't change how much energy your brain uses, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys. But if you have more muscle, you will burn more at rest. If we park a big Land Rover in the driveway, we park the motorbike, we leave them running for 4 hours, we come back, we check, we know the Land Rover is going to use more petrol. A bigger engine burns more. And why is this so important? Because you and I are going to eat the same. Today, this evening, you and I go to Nando's for supper. I'm ordering a half chicken and wedges. In 10 years' time, if we go back, I'm still going to eat a half chicken and wedges because when I go to Nando's, that's my meal. The challenge there is if I've lost my muscle mass, I have no ability to burn all of this energy. And this is why when we use these drugs, we've got to critically monitor muscle and we've got to focus on preventing muscle loss. The second reason we want the muscle is function. If you picture your average 90-year-old, a 90-year-old stands at the edge of the pool, looks in and realizes, sure, if I fall in, I'm going to die. Because the 90-year-old can't swim. He's just bubble, bubble, bubble. It's over. We've got to optimize this muscle. If the 90-year-old slips, he doesn't have the grip strength to grab. He doesn't have the muscle bulk to stop him falling. He slips, he falls, cracks a hip, breaks a pelvis. It's over. And whether the bed sores are going to kill him or the stasis is going to kill him or the nosocomial pneumonia, the healthcare acquired infection because now he's been lying in a hospital bed, we know that this is the beginning of the end for old people. So we've got to look at optimizing muscle through this journey. And I have big concerns with the mass, whether it's legal or illegal prescription of GLP-1s, because are we actually monitoring muscle? Are we actually looking at it? Are we monitoring it? Are we doing body composition scanning? Are we doing DEXA scans? DEXAs are limited because you can only do 2 a year. There's lots of other machinery that we can monitor body composition. But certainly from a longevity perspective, if we lose the muscle, we are losing life. And we don't want to be sitting as old people and frail people. I always say this to my patients. I don't want to meet my grandkids. I have no intention. I have no intention of walking in and everyone being like, oh, guys, Zayda's here. I don't want that experience. My experience, I want to walk in and be like, guys, where's the ball? I want to play. Let's go play soccer. You guys want to swim? I've made all this money as a doctor. Guys, I'll buy you a bicycle. Let's go ride. And again, this is my worldview that I'm putting onto my patients. But most certainly, if we can't optimize muscle, we're going to create a generation of frailty. And this is a big concern of mine, both in terms of the quality of life that we're going to give our patients, but certainly in terms of the costs of healthcare. What is it going to cost to keep all these old, very frail people alive?
I think so. So let's ask the question as well, is once you're on one of these drugs, are you on them for life?
Depends who you ask.
Depends who you ask. I think depends on the patient. That's my answer. I've sort of alluded it similar to, let's call it antidepressants, right? If you have someone who's on an antidepressant because of depression, which is a medical condition, and obesity is a medical condition, if they're looking to come off of that medication in a couple of years' time, and they come to me as their doctor, and this is pretty standard across any doctor, is they'll have a look and say, okay, what is your current environment? Have you done the psychotherapy? Have you been to see a psychologist? Have you addressed this? Have you got coping mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera? If none of those are in place and you're currently going through a divorce and you're moving house and your dog has just died, I'm not going to take you off your antidepressants because chances are you're not going to do well, right? So the idea here is that I think what we're going to see is that these GLP-1s or GIPs for previous individuals who couldn't lose weight, this is going to create a window opportunity for them. And I think we're going to see this in the papers as well. There'll be a window where we take away all of those, kind of really difficult things that they're experiencing in terms of food noise, hunger, and all of that. And we're going to give an opportunity where they can address the core problems without all of that on top of them, where they can start doing the resistance training, where they can optimize protein and their nutrition. They can understand the basics of why that needs to happen. They can put in the coping mechanisms for emotional eating, for, nocturnal eating, all these bits and pieces. If they can do that, that's the type of person who can come off of these medications in the end, if that's the journey they're going for, because we are seeing lots of other potential positive effects of these medications. Some people might want to just be on them for life. So if that's the journey that they're going for, if you do the hard work during that window of opportunity and you pull it off, then 100% I think you can come off these medications, but it really depends on the patient.
So a quick question from Susan, because she says, how long have these medicines been on the market? Are there 20-year follow-ups? Ozempic, for example, how long has that been on the market?
So I think GLP-1s as a class has been on the market for over 20 years now. Um, we had multiple, I think twice daily injectables, which moved to daily injectable liraglutides. We've got a lot of data from around 20 years in safety data. Obviously, they're all different molecules. Ozempic, I think, has been around for the last, Matt, I think it's been about 4 years now.
I,
Somewhere around there that Ozempic.
I think it's a bit longer because they're about to lose their patent next year. So it's got to be more than
So
10.
it would be about, it's got to be about, yeah. So I'm thinking that we'll go be 10, about 10 years that it's been around now, which is half the time of liraglutide. So we're getting a decent amount of data and signal from that again. And once again, using Matt's word signal, these have been, and the penetration
And
of these drugs, how many people are on them, we would know if they were trouble quite quickly.
they FDA approved. Not that that means everything, but it means it's passed through SAPRA approval, it's passed through FDA approval. They considered relatively safe for want of, as far as we know at this point in time.
Yeah, we've
Very
done what we
quick,
could to make sure that they look safe.
very quick question, because I want to move on to the other side, which are the non-FDA approved products in a second. But Pat or Matt, you spoke about cost as a prohibitive factor. How much do these things cost? Pat,
Depends
you
on what you
probably the
prescribe and the dose.
Pat, you probably the person to ask that. But if I want to go on Mounjaro or Zempic, what am I looking at per month?
So you're looking at the starting dose of Wegovy at around about 1,800 Rand per month. And that can go up anywhere to about 3,600 Rand. This obviously depends on pharmacy and markup costs and a whole bunch. So that's by far and large the more widely accessible one. And that's why it makes the job quite hard because, I mean, you've got this beautiful other molecule that you'd love to use, but for a lot of patients, it's just not affordable in the long run. And affordability has to be a consideration before you go on these meds. You can't do it for, there's no point doing it for 3 months and then, being unable to afford it going further. Mounjaro, you're looking at a starting dose of roughly double that. So I think they started around almost 4,000 Rand. They can go up to about 8,000 Rand a month. So it can get significantly expensive. And the problem is that with these medications, you never quite know where you're going to end up in terms of dose. I don't increase dose unless it is required and things aren't happening, because that helps just, maintain the longest dose for as long as possible while you're doing the background lifestyle changes, which really help amplify the effect. So that's the idea behind, how I use a lot of these medications is keeping it as low as possible for as long as possible.
So,
But they are very expensive.
Matt, if we can move over to you, because every time I open my social media, I see a doctor, a professor, a gym trainer, all speaking about something called retatrutide or Reta, or sometimes they refer to it as Ratatouille. So if we had a Zempic as generation 1 and Mounjaro as generation 3, is retatrutide generation 3? And what is the current status of that?
So currently still waiting to be released. We don't have a legal supply yet. There are illicit compounded medications or sort of from your gym bro, wherever they're illegally importing it, available. They do exist, certainly. Someone has taken the patent from the patent office, made the molecule, and then sort of shipped it and sold it widely. But certainly they're not FDA approved. They have passed phase 3 data, which is a really good benchmark in terms of safety and efficacy, but certainly not available. You can't go to let's say a Discom or a Clicks and buy it with a prescription in today's world, anywhere in the world.
What is the phase 3 data telling us about retatrutide, and is it likely to be approved?
Very much so. In fact, I mean, as we alluded to earlier, because of this fight in terms of the length of amino acid, are we registering it as a biologic or as a GLP-1? This is probably the only reason why it hasn't yet been launched on the market. And that will very much depend on two things. One, the availability of compounding pharmacies to produce it because they're not allowed to produce biologics. And second, a cost factor because biologics generally are much more expensive. And this is why I think the manufacturers are waiting because if we could register it as a biologic that was proven for a specific intervention, the medical aids would then have to cover it. And particularly with the obesity epidemic, particularly in the USA, if we can get the US funders to pay rather than 2,000 rand, $2,000 a month, $9,000 or $10,000, the guys who are manufacturing it would much far rather choose a much more expensive price tag. But I think we'll be seeing it shortly. I hope. I mean, the data is unbelievable. It really is an answer to bariatric surgery, but this is certainly not for someone who wants to lose 5 or 10 kilos. I don't think that's appropriate.
So Morris was asking us the question, will medical aid pay? And Morris, I think the answer is you go speak to your doctor, you speak to your medical aid, and every patient will be different. It's depending on the state of your body, the state of your obesity, etc. There's no one answer for many of these questions. And that's why we keep on saying this is a journey that you have to embark upon with your doctor. This is something that has to be monitored along the way. And maybe your doctor will be able to convince your medical insurer that for you, it's an appropriate thing for them to cover. But that's not going to be on a case-by-case basis. So, Matt, we've now kind of dipped our toe because retatrutide isn't SAHPRA approved. It's not FDA approved yet, although I believe it's expected towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, to be an approved drug. And you mentioned, in fact, that it's the equivalent. In fact, it's better results than bariatric surgery for many people, with, I believe, about a 28% body loss on average for many patients. What is the difference? It goes not only for, we spoke about GLP and GIP, it also goes for a third receptor. What's that receptor?
It's the glucagon receptor. It will allow you to then utilize fat more as a fuel source and increase your burn of energy. So in theory, this will increase your burn rate of energy to optimize your energy use. And therefore, if you're burning more energy, you will then burn more calories, which means less fat in your body.
Cool. We're going to come back to fat loss generally in the Q&A section that we're going to do. But Matt, every time I go out for dinner, someone's talking about the peptides that they're on. And explain to us, is there a place for peptides in the medical world? How do you perceive all of this? What should a modern cutting edge medical practice, how do they fit that into the way doctors are treating their patients?
So I think the key thing is we've got to talk about appropriate patient selection and appropriate patient autonomy.
Can you make that a bit bigger for us, please?
Let me.
Can you zoom it? I think maybe at the bottom if you zoom yours. Okay, that's
perfect. Are you happy?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So I think we've got to talk about the right patient selection, but we've got to be looking at responsible use. Do I believe that peptides, something let's say like a BPC 157 for a tendon or ligament injury, will ever replace a surgeon, a chiro, a bio, an anti-inflammatory? Certainly not. And I think this is how we've got to look at, well, this is my worldview in my practice and the doctors that work with me. This is how we would consider using something like a peptide for the right patient. And I think if we look at the overall health, in my practice, overall health optimization has got to be built or stacked as a pyramid. And I use the stack as a play on word because we always talk about stacks in peptides. And this to me is the stack that we should be following. The first level of the stack is to look at appropriate vital signs. And this is certainly not going to be done by your average gym bro. We've got to be looking at a general patient, look at their heart rate, do a urine dipstick. Are they pregnant? Look at their ECG. What is their overall baseline status? And this is really important just as a baseline. Second level, we've got to look at blood biomarkers. And what I mean by blood biomarkers, we've got to look at routine bloods. So look at things like thyroid, cholesterol, look at things like liver function. We've got to look at vitamins and electrolytes. Where are they sitting? Where's their vitamin D, potassium, phosphate, magnesium? Where are we sitting in terms of hormones? And again, this goes back to the question of ruling out really common things. Is the reason the patient's coming in for the peptide consultation or the need for peptides because maybe their shoulder's sore, because actually they've got low systemic estrogen and the adhesive capsulitis is actually just a sign of their menopause? Maybe they've got low testosterone and that's the cause of their erectile dysfunction or their poor recovery. Maybe they're overweight because actually there's an undiagnosed thyroid problem. Maybe they're exhausted because they've got low iron. And we've got to rule all of these things out before we go and look at all these very expensive, very complicated peptides before we even go there. Next level up is to look at things like cardiometabolic fitness. Look at strength and flexibility. Look at VO2 max and lung function. Look at body composition. And this is critical on a peptide journey because what are we actually trying to achieve? What is the target of these peptides? Using even things like GLP-1s. A lot of patients can't tolerate GLP-1s or they just don't work. I can tell you in my practice, we can do a VO2 test on you, and I can tell you exactly the heart rate that you will burn the most fat, which is very simple. It's generally much lower than people would predict. And you could then go and get on a treadmill and hold your heart rate there. Use myself as an example.
Tell us about yourself.
So use myself as an example. So we do VO2 max testing. We put a mask on you and slowly and incrementally you run on a treadmill and we'll increase the speed and incline. And while you do this, we will then figure out what substrate usage, what fuel are you using to then do your exercise. And we can then very quickly tell you at what heart rate you then burn the most fat. So you could then use this. This is a lot of watches or the Garmin's, the Auras, the Whoops would tell you a zone 2, but we can actually measure it. It's not a calculation, it's a real measurement, and it's very patient specific where you burn fat. So we would then use these metrics to then optimize the way you exercise. So using me as an example this morning, I spent 2 hours on my Zwift bike at 123 beats per minute for 2 hours, and I exclusively burned fat. Why? Because I want to be lean. So I don't want to waste my time in a heart rate where I'm not actually burning the fuel source that I want to do. And I want to teach my body to metabolize fat as a fuel source because it will allow me to run much faster over greater distances. And once we've looked at these things, then we can consider something like biohacking. And this would be a general view in terms of looking at things like peptides, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, red light therapy, sauna, cold plunge. But the key caveat with all of these is looking at, or sort of, I just want to load the next slide. Don't you love it when it pauses? Is we've got to look at this in concert with 4 key factors. And these 4 factors cannot be ignored. We've got to look at targeted screening before we even get to the biohacking. What does this mean? If you come from a family that's known with breast cancer, you need a mammogram, ma'am. We're not going to give you peptides if there's a cancer risk. You need your colonoscopy. You need your PSA. We've got to look at realistic things and modify this specific to your risk profile. We've got to look at risk reduction. And what I mean by this is vaccination and pre and post exposure prophylaxis. Yes, I could give you a peptide, but how am I going to optimize your health? You would be alarmed at how much STD testing and HIV testing I do in my practice. Why are we not giving the patients a pre-exposure or post-exposure prophylaxis? Why are we not giving them a Gardasil 9 vaccine, a flu vaccine? The other caveat here is we've got to look at mental health. I can make you the slimmest person in the world, but if you're lonely, and you have no social connection, or you don't have if your cognitive performance is being limited, let's say by an ADD, your peptides aren't gonna be the golden caveat. And the last and hardest caveat is the sleep. I mean, you articulated beautifully earlier about your desire to rule out sleep apnea. We've got to optimize sleep, both in quality and quantity, architecture, and look at breathing. If you have sleep apnea, there are no peptides in the world that are going to take away your fatigue. We've got to optimize you. So before we do anything, we've got to actually take a global look at you and understand that it's specific to you as the individual. How do we optimize you? And very often in the journey to even consider peptides, because they are not a primary modality of healthcare, we will often identify a cause along the journey, and you will not need peptides. So I think this is a key thing that we've got to look at when we're using peptides, or even considering them to manage patient, whatever the patient desire is.
So Matt, I want to pick up on something that you said, and that was around testosterone. That one of the things you have to test for, you need to do cancer screening, and we'll get onto why cancer screening is so important in a second. But also testosterone, where should men be on the testosterone scale? And women, maybe.
This is not medical advice. I'm not going to give you the numbers. But I'll answer your question. I'll answer two caveats. If there were 2 things I could tell the world about testosterone, number 1, testosterone is a mood drug. And in my practice, the leading reason why I prescribe testosterone is actually mood. Everyone thinks I'm giving testosterone for sexual function and body composition. The real overwhelming majority of my patients take it for mood. Testosterone gives us energy, it gives us vitality, it decreases anxiety, it gives us confidence, motivation, mental clarity. It helps us sleep, it helps us recover. And I think that most people are not aware of that, and both in men and women. And yeah, I get very frustrated by a lot of people who are initially prescribed antidepressants or very interesting concoctions, and we don't test the basics. The second caveat is it's critical for both men and women, and this is a big thing. And the FDA have just removed they had a big fight recently this year. They've removed their black box warning, but certainly testosterone can be used in women, and yeah.
So just to answer some of the questions, Matt, can I get your phone number? The answer is that's what Google is for. Dr.
Sure.
Matthew O'Reilly and Dr. Patrick Bennett, they're all available on Google. We're not using this as an advertising platform. And is there a recording of this? Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, all of the Juice Report webinars are all available on YouTube, and that's where we've had about 7 or 8 million people who've watched us. So please feel free to watch again, and also to refer to all your friends. And don't forget as well, like and subscribe our channel, please. That's the one thing that we ask of you. So, Matt, I want to go on to, because I think we have to be honest and realistic. A lot of people watching us this evening are already on peptides. Either because their doctor gave it to them, or because their gym trainer gave it to them, or because they saw something on social media. And if they're not on, they're seriously considering it.
Correct.
And therefore, I want people to get a better understanding of what these peptides are meant for, how people are using them. And I want to start with, you mentioned earlier something called stacks. And the one stack is people put together 2 peptides, BPC 157 and TB 500. Explain to us what that is and why people are actually using it. And then we'll talk about, is it safe and what tests you should do before.
So certainly this most people would call this the Wolverine stack. Wolverine referring to X-Men. It's a healing peptide.
Because if we remember in the movie, the actor goes, who was it, the Australian, whatever his name was, he goes like that, and Hugh Jackman, and his fingers and his nails grow again. So it is the Wolverine stack of regrowth. What do people use it for, and is it safe?
So I think with a lot of drugs, there are multiple reasons that we could prescribe it. The most common reason for prescribing something like a BPC 157 and TB 500 would be to optimize healing, particularly in wound injury. So let's just say a torn tendon, a torn ligament, a torn muscle. Particularly, like, tendons are very hard to heal because the oxygen supply is very poor. And these peptides, TB 500 and BPC 157, they can often help new vessels to grow. And this is where the risk of cancer bothers us, because this is one of the hijack mechanisms that cancer can use to increase the way cancer multiplies. So we would definitely want to rule it out. We would want to do responsible testing, but certainly it's also a drug that we don't prescribe forever. So it's a very short-term use that we would then use to heal an injury, a wound, a knee, a shoulder, ankle.
I want to maybe just run through some of that again in my understanding, so I've got it clear. The BPC 157 helps you grow additional blood vessels through, while the TB 500 actually does the repair. However, if you have an underlying cancer, is what you're saying, the underlying cancer will use the BPC 157 to help it. It won't cause cancer, but if you already have cancer, it will use the same mechanisms to help the cancer grow. And that's why
we would worry about that.
Before you even start, you have to be fully examined and make sure that you do not have underlying cancers before you start the Wolverine stack for repair. Certainly, it hasn't been fully tested on randomized human trials. Am I permitted to say that every athlete I know is on it or has been on it and thinks it's miraculous?
So a lot of athletes report tremendous recovering following injury, and have used. We know lots of reports of athletes who've. I mean, even in terms of confidentially, I treat a lot of very interesting athletes. I won't obviously disclose who they are, but they have successfully used it to return to play very quickly. It is banned by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association, but certainly just to close, there's a theoretical risk. We're not saying that it causes, this is a worry. And this is why we would want to do reasonable and appropriate screening before giving a patient, something like a TB500 or BPC 157. Again, reasonable and appropriate, and there's a theoretical concern. We don't have strong data that it has exacerbated or worsened cancer. And also our concern there is limited because we are not putting this patient on it for years at a time. We would use it like an anti-inflammatory, of course, of painkillers.
So am I also correct in saying, because I've come across people who are proactively taking the Wolverine stack with no injuries, that seems to be ridiculous?
Yes. And I can tell you I've had patients who use it. And in terms of optimizing performance, I haven't seen much. The key caveat also here is, do we actually know what they're taking is what they're taking? And I think we really have to just sort of double click on the fact that most people who are taking peptides in this country are getting them from illegal supply. They're getting it from their gym bro, their nails lady, TikTok, Instagram. They're ordering it online. It comes in a brown bag with no expiry date, with no source. I'll just say made in Dubai, with some fancy label. It will not, there's no chain of reporting any adverse effects. We don't know whether it's stable, in that after it's gone and sat in a harbor or an airplane, was it actually kept cold? Is it actually efficacious? So in other words, it says BPC 157. Is it still 100% BPC 157 or has it biodegraded? We don't know if it's sterile, in that, is there a bacteria in it? Are there endotoxins? Is this peptide, the moment you inject it, going to cause an immune response, an allergic, an anaphylactic response? We don't know also in terms of reporting who we can tell and report to, because there's no name. Where does it come from? Just this sort of clicker with no name on it. And this is where,
can we say it doesn't have to be that way? If you go to
No.
your doctor, there are legitimate SAHPRA approved registered compounding pharmacies in South Africa that can produce it and will guarantee the quality of it. And that's
Yes.
a very different world to your gym bro actually giving you something to inject into your body.
100%. It's a
So-
completely different world. And I think even in terms of adverse reporting and efficacy, this is where we are getting a very conflicting signal. Because when someone arrives in the emergency department with an allergic reaction and says, I took my pen of BPC 157 and this is now, I can't breathe. Do we actually know that it's BPC 157? Is this real BPC 157? Is it clean? Is it stable? Is it sterile? And I think that this is also going to create a lot of conflict, particularly in South Africa, where we have such limited supply, because in terms of the legalities of how we actually allowed to register these drugs in South Africa, when we get the signal of the efficacy, is it even a real signal? Because what's in all of this gym bro stuff? What is it?
Okay, cool. So Matt, I'm going to speed up our pace. We've spoken about the Wolverine stack. The next stack we're going to go is to something called the Glow stack. What is that?
Glow. So Glow includes a copper peptide. It's generally, like, if you look at the...
Can we say it's Wolverine plus copper peptide?
Yes, correct. So generally added in for collagen. So a lot of wound healing would use collagen. And some would advise adding it in as a third adjunct to improve healing.
Then there's something called the Glow stack. Glow, but with a K. What is that?
So Glow, I haven't yet found a compounding pharmacy in South Africa to produce it in an injectable form. So I have never had access to this in a clean, stable, sterile form. It's got KPV in it. KPV is reported to do really good things to skin and very good for inflammation. We can get some of the compounding pharmacies make it in an oral in South Africa, but certainly no, I've never seen a legal variant of Glow.
So we're going to quickly go through a few kind of categories of where people are using peptides, and I'd love you to comment about some of those peptides. We've spoken about in weight loss. We obviously went through the Zempics, the Mounjaros. We spent some time on retatrutide, but there are a few other peptides, and let's talk the first one, tesamorelin.
So tesamorelin, we could add as an adjunct. Now, this is something that we would consider when a patient plateaus. Now, is this a primary consideration? No. This is not this is not the first point of call when the GLP-1 stagnates. This could be something to consider in terms of optimizing an ability to burn fat around organs. It is FDA approved in the USA. You could walk into a Walgreens with a script from an American doctor and go and buy this. The data behind tesamorelin is based on lipodystrophy from HIV patients. Some of the HIV medicine causes fat deposits in the body, and they found some efficacy of using it to burn this fat around the body as one of the ways to reduce it. The challenge is when you go off the drug, often it can return.
So just the sort of fat that goes after isn't kind of your standard fat. It's the dangerous fat that
Organ fat.
compounds about your around your kidneys, your liver,
Yeah.
what's known as visceral
Visceral
fat.
fat. Yes.
And that seems to attack visceral fat. So we have an FDA approved,
Yes.
very expensive,
Correct. Very.
proved for HIV patients, untested on non-HIV patients, but
Yes.
certainly anecdotally, people do seem to lose a lot of visceral fat if they go
With it.
into tesamorelin as a compound.
Correct. Yes. It works
Okay.
by encouraging growth hormone. So it works on your brain to release more growth hormone.
Okay. Then ipamorelin. They
So
all have
ipamorelin, pretty
terrible
sim
names. I'm sorry.
pretty similar. Also works on the growth hormone, often combined with something called CJC1295. CJC1295 works on a ghrelin receptor, but both of them, the goal here is to increase growth hormone. And the goal there would be to burn more visceral fat, that organ fat, and optimize muscle growth to increase the growth.
And so a lot of this has to do with growth hormone. Is that dangerous?
So again, we've got to use it for the right indication. Patient selection is key. We've got to select it for the right patients, but certainly it's about letting the patient understand the risk that they want to choose. This is not a drug that is approved by SAHPRA. It is not FDA approved. It will, when we hope in July, move from the category 1 to the category 2 list, so the American compounding pharmacies can make it, which will allow for more data, for the US guys to collect more data. But yeah, some of the
You
compounding pharmacies in South Africa will make it for you.
you say not if SAHPRA approved, but it doesn't have to be. Your vitamin C that you get in the pharmacy isn't SAHPRA approved.
Yes.
It's not in that category that requires regulation at this point in time.
So certainly it should. And this is where I think a lot of the compounding pharmacies are now. There's a lot of debate in the compounding pharmacies, particularly the bigger ones, of whether they actually want to continue to produce it. Because SAHPRA is not approving the use of peptides. So the availability of the raws, the actual active ingredient, is a big question in terms of where we are sourcing these ingredients. And that's a big concern because this is going to enhance this gray or black market supply. And that's a big concern because where are we actually going to get the availability of these safe, clean, stable, sterile products?
One more peptide for weight loss to comment on, AOD 960.
Yeah, you're made in Australia initially. Yeah, with limited success on weight loss. They banned it on its phase 2 trials, but you could consider it in some patients when they plateau. Consider, but certainly not as a first line.
Okay, then let's go into a new category, aesthetics and beauty. You mentioned a little earlier copper peptide, ghk.cu,
Yeah.
for healing wounds, but a lot of people are taking it for collagen production in their face. In fact, one of the side effects of Ozempic is something called the Zempic face. If you lose too much weight too quickly, you get that very saggy look in your face. And one of the things that is recommended to counter that is GHKCU, the copper peptide, which produces collagen in your skin. Tell us a little more about that.
So I wouldn't recommend it. I certainly don't prescribe it to my patients as a standard who are on a GLP-1. The availability is as a cream, as a topical. There's a lot more data on the topical than injectable. And the hope there is that it will enhance collagen production, which will then enhance your hair, skin, and nails.
Okay. Then there's something called melanotan 2.
Yeah.
What is that used for?
Yeah, I know of no compounding pharmacy in South Africa who's producing it. So all available source in South Africa is for research only. Melanotan 2 can be used to enhance sexual function. So we can use it to enhance erections. That's one thing. The other key thing, which most people take it for, is actually tanning. But there's a big concern there in terms of dose So it can, from a sexual function, cause very prolonged erections, which can be dangerous to, you could actually lose your ability to have an erection. So I would watch that in men. And in terms of diagnosing melanoma, there's big concern in terms of whether it can exacerbate a melanoma, but certainly in terms of diagnosing a melanoma of being cancerous, because it darkens your skin, it will darken a mole and becomes much harder to diagnose. So I'm very nervous of this peptide.
In fact, many of the experts, international experts, are saying stay as far away from melanotan 2 as possible. It may be very dangerous in relation to skin cancer.
Yeah, I'm nervous. Yeah, no thanks. Not keen.
Matt, I've never seen you take off your hat. I don't know what's underneath, but talk to us about PP405.
So PB405 is it's a peptide, again, also no stable sterile supply that I'm aware of in South Africa, all illicit. This is a peptide that can enhance hair growth. So dormant hair follicles can be activated. So it is something that you could consider. My advice would be rather consider a hair transplant. Very sparse data on the success of this drug.
Is that something you put on topically, or is that something you inject?
Injectable.
Injectable. Okay, cool. Then a lot of people are taking peptides for brain function, and we
Correct.
want to deal with a few of them. One of the things is called CMAX, not the prison. This is with an S.
SEMAX, a Russian peptide with its sister Silank. Definitely, yeah, both of them are available in Russia. It's hard to use the Russian data from a language barrier. There's a lot of arguments in terms of whether they're overselling it or underselling it. CMAX, there's some data in terms of neuroprotection and cognitive enhancement. You can get it in South Africa from some compounding pharmacies. It comes as a nasal spray, and you would just take a puff and use it. Can also sometimes
And what effects would you expect?
enhance cognitive function. There's some data in terms of using it for neuroprotection after having a stroke, but very, very, very limited. I've not read enough. I certainly wouldn't give it to anyone having a stroke.
So one of the things that keeps on popping up on my feed as well is not a peptide, but creatine for brain function. What are your thoughts on that?
So really good. Lots and lots of evidence that's coming out, more and more and more. 5, 10 years ago, use the signal word again. 5 or 10 years ago, it was a very weak signal. But as we've collected more and more data, both from a muscle function, do we see benefits, but certainly from a cognitive function, patients who have lack of sleep, let's say you're working a long night shift, taking a dose of creatine can optimize function. So there's some very interesting data there. But certainly it should be a weight-based dose. And I would ideally want to test your kidney function before going on it.
So let's swing away from brain function and let's talk about energy. And on energy, I see someone's already asked the question about something called MOTS-C.
Yeah, MOTS-C. Yeah, limited data. It's not something we use commonly. It's what people would call a mitochondrial peptide. You can get it in South Africa from some compounding pharmacies. Generally, yeah, the goal with MOTS-C, it can also be added with something called Ectus 31. Depends how you want to use it or prescribe it. But the goal there is to optimize energy production. But certainly not DARPA approved and not FDA approved.
Certainly for people that I know who've been taking it, they say great increase in energy. The question is, should you cycle many of these things? Because sometimes you don't want to exhaust your receptors.
So definitely, I wouldn't use them forever. This is not something you would want to live on. But this is where the doctor would come in, or whoever's, the doctor would, not whoever, the doctor would then give you the advice to do it. Not your chiro, your dentist, your jumbro, your friend on Instagram, who's prescribing you the same stack for everyone. Not just that's something that's specific to you, but certainly something you would consider going on them, going off them, using them for a limited period of time. But it's the same thing as an antibiotic. You wouldn't live on a course of Augmentin. You use it for a specific intention.
So also within the energy field, and not a peptide, but a lot of people are taking NAD plus drips, or one of the precursors of NAD, either NR or NMN. What are your thoughts on NAD?
So limited data. Some patients really like it. I think it's something it's again, for the right indication, Depends. I'm not prescribing it very widely, but certainly more from an energy production to repair DNA. A lot of data for detox, particularly addiction. There's some interesting data there. But a lot of the NAD that's circulating, if you ever ask someone who's had an NAD drip, ask them if they felt really sick on it. If you have a real NAD drip, you will want to die. It is awful. It's something that it's one of the biggest tells whether it's real or not. If you have it as an IV, if you don't feel awful and tell them it's too fast, turn it down, you're not getting NAD.
So I'm a big groupie of someone called David Sinclair, Harvard professor on anti-aging. I've watched everything he's ever done probably in the last 8 years, and he will never tell you what you should take. But he does say that both himself and his 87-year-old father's in perfect health. On his stack of what he takes every morning, he takes a precursor of something that makes NAD in the body called NMN. He takes resveratrol, and then he takes some other interesting things like spermidine and glycine. But the two key elements of his stack from an aging perspective, if people watching want to actually go examine this, you need to go look at the resveratrol and the NAD. Let's talk about body repair. We've spoken about the Wolverine stack. We've spoken about BPC 157 and TB 500. But ipamorelin.
Yeah, so I mean, ipamorelin, tesamorelin. There's another growth hormone secretagogue called semarelin. Semarelin not widely available in South Africa through compounding pharmacies. Could be they release growth hormone, and for patients who want to optimize repair, a post-surgical repair, they could then consider using something like an ipamorelin to optimize the release of growth hormone. That growth hormone can then speed up tissue repair and can, in theory, in some cases, allow for faster return to play or work.
And the
But
last
limited
one,
data, very limited data.
the last one I want to cover from my side, and then we're going to ask everyone who has a question either on weight loss or on peptides or on anything that we've discussed tonight to start posting into the chat, because I'm sorry it's been so difficult to keep up. And also, please don't write us very lengthy essays on this. We need to actually get the questions and very short answers. But you spoke earlier about C-Max nasal spray, but there is a nasal spray relating to sexual function, and that's PT141. Have you had any experience with patients on that?
Yes, it is available. You can actually also get it as an injectable. I prefer the injectable. So it's a drug that's centrally acting. So it is approved in America. It's FDA approved for women, for premenopausal women, for hypoactive sexual desire disorder. So what that means is most sexual enhancement drugs are actually for men. They work on vasodilatation, so like a Viagra, Cialis, Tadalafil. They work on the actual local sex organ, but this drug works in your brain and can increase desire, sexual satisfaction, improved orgasm. It's a very interesting drug. Men can use it also, and we've had some very interesting results. It's a very popular drug. Yeah, you can consider it, but it wouldn't be a place to start. I would much far rather look at your hormones. That would be, most patients do not need PT141.
So that's a lot for everyone to have actually absorbed tonight. But there are lots of people with so many questions. The one question that I see that someone posted is they've got stage 4 cancer and they want to know, are peptides safe? I see, Matt, you shaking your head.
Other than considering a GLP-1, maybe. Yeah, I think this is probably something that I wouldn't even talk about.
I think maybe to be clear as well, because we did talk about the link between cancer and the prevention of cancer and such. There's no evidence at all that you currently have a cancer. Taking a GLP-1 is going to do anything beneficial to that, because quite obviously they're not doing studies on those at the moment. And also a lot of the time during these cancer, or someone who's suffering with cancer will have quite a catabolic state where they're breaking down a lot of their tissues anyway to support the growth of this unfortunate the cancer that's inside them. So adding something on like this could be a problem. Often nutrition has to be optimized more than anything else. So
Great.
yeah, I think I just wanted to point that out, because I think there were a few questions around cancers and taking it at that point. So it's more around prevention of certain cancers, often related to obesity itself.
Yeah.
So, Matt,
but this is not medical advice. I think this needs to be discussed with the oncologist.
Go to your doctor. Then always go to your doctor.
It is not something that I would encourage patients to consider without a lengthy discussion with the oncologist.
So, Matt, I notice across the road from your practice or across the passageway from your practice are hyperbaric chambers. And
Yeah.
Candace has a question about hyperbaric oxygen. For those of us who follow someone called Brian Johnson on Instagram, who's this guy who thinks he should never die and he's putting millions of dollars into staying alive every month, he says the most effective thing that he's done, albeit enormously expensive, is to do, I think, 3 hyperbaric sessions a week where they pump oxygen at high pressure into your body. What are your thoughts?
So the data that's on hyperbaric oxygen is limited, but most of the data is looking at hyperbaric chambers that go beyond 2 atmospheres. And most of the commercially available devices only go to 1 or 1.4 atmospheres. So we're very limited in the availability of the right chamber. So what's your chamber? Is your chamber actually, is it the right depth?
Can I say, just speaking about Brian Johnson, friends who went to his Shanghai talk, he only leaves America, I think, twice a year because he believes the radiation from flying is actually really bad for you. And one of the people, when he spoke in Shanghai, one of the few occasions he gave a public speech, they said, if you were to do one thing for your health, and only one thing, what would it be? And his answer was sauna. There seems to be substantial, long-term, proven positive results of people sitting in saunas. Just if you're a man and you plan on having children and you still want to do it, he recommends you put an ice pack over your junk.
Yeah.
But are you guys both in agreement that sauna seems to be one of the key factors for health and longevity?
I think, yes, there is a lot of good data. The challenge, using Brian Johnson as an example, is the time it takes to do this. And that's where I think you've got to find an approach that actually works with the patient's realistic life. Because most people who are employed have real jobs, do not have 3, 4, 5 hours a day to now go and do hyperbaric oxygen, sauna, peptides, inject zone 2 training, resistance-based training, have X amount of meals, measure their diet, do flexibility and mobility work. So I think it's about finding what works for the patient that can be continuous and consistent. So what actually the patient can do in the long term. And I think Pat said it beautifully earlier. The GLP-1s are a tool to optimize your life. The more focus needs to be on your life than actually the injection.
Yeah, I
So
think two things on that is that the minimum dose, I think effective dose was about 3 sessions, 20 minutes per week. So it's possible for a lot of people, a lot of good evidence behind it as well. And then on the lifestyle thing, by far the cheapest and best intervention you could possibly ever make for longevity and your overall health is also completely free, and no one wants to hear it, but it's usually related to exercise and sleep. Those two levers, if you pull hard enough, are going to do most of the work for you.
Yeah.
So one comment that comes in on Tessa Morellin, and that is be careful of insulin resistance and glucose. Something to watch out for, to be very careful on for insulin resistant patients.
And carpal tunnel. So growth hormone, if you have carpal tunnel, it's something that you should watch out for. It can exacerbate carpal tunnel.
So Patrick, a question I think for you, is there evidence that GLP-1s could help abate the onset of Alzheimer's? APOE3 and 4. I'm not sure what that means.
Oh, those are certain genes that are tied to the onset of Alzheimer's. So I'm sure Matt probably tests for a lot of these. We've only recently got testing for them as well, I think from Lancet. So the truth is that there was a lot of hype around this sort of early last year. I think it was somewhere around there. But the studies that have since come out they're not showing a massive improvement. I think that when we have a crossover between vascular, which is a different type of dementia, where there's sort of lots of tiny strokes within the blood vessels, and Alzheimer's, or even maybe a type 3 type of diabetes, which we called, kind of metabolic dysfunction, which causes brain issues or neurocognitive issues. We might see improvements in those patients specifically, but Alzheimer's itself, unfortunately, we haven't seen anything to write home about, unfortunately.
So a question from breastfeeding mothers or breastfeeding mothers. Should they avoid any of the weight loss drugs or any of the peptides?
No GLP-1s, breastfeeding or pregnancy, no, or actively trying to conceive. Yeah, absolutely not. No GLP-1s or or dual agonists from our side. And then can consider there's a few patients we have who are considering sort of for fertility treatment reasons, and there's a lot of optimization that can happen prior to fertility. But these drugs have to be stopped and have to be, they have to go out of your system before you can look at doing the actual procedure itself. So absolutely not during pregnancy, absolutely not during breastfeeding.
So, Matt, maybe I can ask you. Lola is asking about retatrutide and decrease in muscle loss.
The risk with all GLP-1s of muscle loss is there. Because we haven't seen enough data using the real drug, I'm very concerned because of the strength of this drug that we're going to see significant muscle loss. I don't think that the gym bros on Instagram are correct. I very much worry that there's going to be some significant muscle loss with Reta. This belief or this online thing that Reta protects and optimizes your metabolism, I don't believe that is true. I think that's a claim, and if you click on the Oak's profile to his promo code, you will for sure enhance
You'll be
his
sold.
yeah.
You'll be sold Reta at some point.
I don't believe that there's a benefit. I don't believe there's any muscle protection, and I very much worry that it's going to be even more muscle loss, which from a longevity perspective is going to hurt a lot of patients.
I'm not quite sure what this means, but do peptides impact positively or negatively on PD patients?
Personality disorder.
Ah,
If personality disorder is what you mean, there is some off-label use using the GLP-1s for mood, for depression. It's limited data, but certainly we're now saying Parkinson's. Parkinson's also emerging evidence. Speak to your neurologist and see if they're comfortable to consider a dose, but it wouldn't be a weight loss dose. It would be a much lower dose in general.
And once again, off-label and once again discussed case by case basis. Yeah. I think,
Very,
sorry, I just want to point out one quick thing around the muscle loss of these drugs. And I agree with Matt, it is a real problem. But I think that the truth is that I want to just point out that these drugs don't act directly on the muscle to cause muscle loss. I think that's something that a lot of people think happens, but it's purely the fact that they can create quite a big calorie deficit. So there's a lot of nuance to managing these. Someone who could normally, if you weren't on a GLP-1, if you put someone on a 300 calorie diet, which is basically one smoothie from Virgin Active per day, they would be starving. And by the end of the day, they would have eaten something. These GLP-1s sort of block those starving receptors. So someone can very happily stay on 300 calories and eat almost nothing and no micronutrients, barely any macronutrients, no protein. And you couple that with someone who previously was doing no resistance training and is still doing no resistance training, you're going to end up in trouble. So the whole point is managing that process. And I think that's what's so important with these medications, is that people are doing it themselves using maybe ChatGPT or something to guide them. And it's just unfortunately not going to be good enough.
someone says, if you have done Victoza and Ozempic, do they stop working on you?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but maybe they're talking about the fact that sometimes these drugs you can get to a point where you no longer feel the effects of these drugs, and that is quite common. That can happen. You can build a little bit of a tolerability up against these medications, or your body can get quite used to them, and you might need to go up on a dose. But once again, that's a conversation that you need to have between you and your provider.
Basil asks, can GLP-1s cause significant loss of vision?
Good question. So there's a big, very real risk. And by big, I would say there's two major ones that's linked to. One of them is a very real risk, but however is also very rare. So we're seeing around 1 in 10,000 cases of this occurring, and that's when you would suddenly the painless vision loss in one eye, and you can't actually predict which patients this is going to happen in either. So it is something that's actually black label. They've added it to these GLP-1 medications. It's on there as one of the risks, but once again is cited as extremely rare. The other one is diabetics. So if you're diabetic with really high blood sugar and you have already got eye problems called retinopathy, then lowering the blood sugar with these medications pretty rapidly, because remember, that is what they do, can lead to worsening of that retinopathy. So definitely something you need to disclose to the doctor who's treating you, and definitely something needs to be checked first.
To both of our doctors, what about microdosing of GLP-1s?
Depends for what, but can be really effective. In certain patients, phenomenal results.
Okay. Then someone asks, are we potentially opening the door for long-term terminal effects that we are so unaware of with peptides?
I've
Yeah.
completely lost my audio. Sorry, guys. Give me.
Of course, Matt, we'll continue with you, but are we opening the door? And I think you spoke about a risk tolerance much earlier on in the webinar.
It very much is. There's a lot of data that's missing in regard to peptides. We don't have 20-year trial data on a lot of medication. And this is, I mean, if we look at other medications that have been even FDA approved and released on the market, look at a drug like something like Vioxx. Vioxx was released by Merck, a brilliant anti-inflammatory, marketed as one that was very safe, much more tolerable because it, in theory, caused less tummy upset in terms of ulcers. And eventually, once thousands of doses, millions of doses had been prescribed, we realized that Vioxx, FDA approved, SAPA approved, available in South Africa, available in the US, actually increased your risks of heart attacks and stroke. And Merck withdrew it. It's no longer available. But this is the reality of taking any medication that is new. We have limited data, but using the obesity as an example with the GLP-1, we know for sure that obesity increases your chance of cancer. There is definitely going to be some things that we're going to learn down the road, but it's about being comfortable with the risk that you take. But not using them is also a decision. Using them is also, it's not using them and using them is both a decision. But you as the patient need to be comfortable with the decision that you take.
So everyone watching, we've got about 5 minutes left. So if you have a question, this is the perfect time to post it onto Zoom, YouTube, or Facebook, so we can take it through to our panelists. And a few people have posted about their diseases and whether there's anything that any of the science is showing them. And PD, which we took as personality disorder, the person actually meant Parkinson's disease. Pat, I think you mentioned Parkinson's as there was some evidence relating to Parkinson's treatment with GLP-1s. Am I correct? Do I remember correctly?
I think that was Matt. But yeah, there is some evidence. I think a lot of these neurocognitive disorders, there'll be some mediation in some form with inflammation. So whenever you're looking at diseases that have a lot of inflammation as the backbone of a lot of these, we're going to see an improvement in some of them with these GLP-1s, just purely because of how these medications are working. So I think there's a lot of, wonderful things that we are going to see, but I would be cautious until we really do, I wouldn't use it as a treatment. I would definitely, as we said before, discuss it with your provider. Definitely don't take this upon yourself to give it a shot and see what happens. I don't think that's the way to go about it. I think optimizing everything else and then, taking it from there and having a discussion with your neurologist is the right way to do that.
100%.
Matt, people have asked, are there any peptides that have been used for restless leg syndrome and anything for multiple sclerosis that you've seen?
Restless leg, I'm not too sure. I don't know the answer there. MS also not sure. I
Okay.
haven't, I haven't really, I wouldn't comment.
Then someone is asking cartilage regeneration. Is that part of the Wolverine stack that we spoke about earlier?
So I think what they're asking here is actually about GLP-1s. There's some evidence coming out, very limited data, small, about GLP-1s actually regenerating cartilage. It's interesting, it's new. It is not widely proven or widely accepted, but certainly emerging data of the use of GLP-1s to regenerate cartilage. So for someone like an athlete to use it as a cartilage regeneration strategy, but certainly not primary, and certainly something that you could discuss with your doctor.
And
Limited
also, I
data.
think by far and large, if we're talking about cartilage, it's usually people who have osteoarthritis. And often, just looking at the weight loss itself, you're looking at a massive impact on that from a gravity standpoint. So weight
Yeah.
loss from the GLP-1s is probably a far more pertinent result than some form of cartilage regeneration. I don't think it's going to regrow your knee, let's put it that way. But I do think that you'll get better quality of life from the loss of weight.
Someone has just posted something called Nutrafol. I'm not quite sure what that is, but I trust we sent you both to medical school, so you can.
Neutral.
Does
I'm going to
Nutrafol?
also drawing a blank on that.
Okay, I'm not saying we need a
Never
refund
heard
on
that.
your medical career, but Pat, a question has come through from someone that says, I'm on GLP-1s, but I've reached a plateau. I'm not on the highest dose, but what do I do next if I've reached the plateau and I'm not losing any more weight?
Yeah, probably the number one most common question that I get, to be honest with you. And I think doing a solid sort of self-audit, so starting right from the beginning again. So often what happens if you start losing weight, the calories that you were eating for are no longer the calories that are keeping you in a deficit. So you have to recalculate those and make sure you're in that calorie deficit still. That's by far and large for me the number one thing that ends up driving a lot of the plateaus. They're still eating for weight loss, let's say 300 to 500 calorie weight loss on what they were weighing, not what they're currently weighing, which I think is extremely important. So that's the first one. If they've optimized everything from a nutrition standpoint, then I try to increase their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is just a fancy way of talking about the little tiny movements that you do throughout the day without even thinking about it. And that is usually things like blinking movement, spontaneous movement, tremor, just jostling your leg under the table, whatever it might be. And then I do that by just cognizant or telling them to be cognizant of their steps and count their steps on whatever diet device that they are using and try and increase that. So if they were on 6,000, move it to 8,000, try and hit 8,000 steps every single day alongside the nutrition, and then often things start to move. But sometimes you might need an increase in dose. A lot of it, as I said, is dependent on the patient. And whenever you have these problems, a thorough audit with a dietitian and with your practitioner is probably the best thing that you can do.
So Susan says we haven't answered the question about the long-term side effects of GLP-1s. I think, Susan, we actually have. We've spoken about at length about muscle loss and the dangers of muscle loss. Is there bone density fear as well, Matt?
Big time. Yes. Yeah,
And
definitely.
and Susan, we spoke about a number of things that you had to do to mitigate against that. The one was resistance training. Second one was protein. And then Patrick went into quite extensive about behavior modification so that it will allow you to get off your GLP-1s. And that had to do with things like exercise and eating. And so, Susan, please go back, look at the recording. I think we've answered that quite extensively. Another question that we have is any advice on the use of Paneolon, Epithalon, or DSIP for quality of sleep and cognitive function? Matt, I think that's in your court.
So yeah, limited availability in South Africa. And your first point of call should be going to have a sleep study. Go and see someone who specializes in sleep, as Howard said in the beginning of this. Go and have your sleep study and go and work and really take a deep dive into your sleep. That I think would be the first port of call. Yeah, if you haven't done that, it wouldn't be something that we would even discuss.
Pat, I want to wrap a few questions into one because I think the question really comes down to if I'm taking a GLP-1 and I reach my ideal weight, what do I do then? Do I come off? Do I microdose? What is my course of action? And someone is asking, what does microdose actually mean?
Good. So there's a lot of studies that started off with what happens when you're on these medications and what are the results of these medications. And now we're starting to see a lot of studies that are coming out once you have hit the weight, what happens afterwards. So a lot of the big studies, they just stopped the medication, stopped the lifestyle interventions, and they said, okay, there we go, goodbye. And what we found is obviously those patients regained the weight. Surprise, surprise, obviously. So what we're finding now is that there was recently a study that showed that there's two interventions, I think, that are the most important when you're nearing the end of the journey and you're looking to come off. One is going down to your lowest tolerable dose. So a dose that's giving you all the good effects that you need to still maintain the weight loss at the lowest dose possible. And then once you've reached that is looking at taking that every second week. And there's really good data that weight loss and the beneficial metabolic effects still continue on that every second week dose. And then what I think we're going to see is that that's going to move out even further to every third week, fourth week, and then gradually titrate it off. And at that time, obviously, it's massively important to have all the behavioral, lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, movement, all of that needs to be, on point in order to maintain this. And I tell all my patients, you are going to work harder than the person who is currently at your weight to maintain your weight. You're going to work harder. So whatever they're doing, you're going to be doing more. And if you're okay with that, then you're going to be okay.
Patrick,
And
this may be a,
then,
sorry,
sorry, the
please continue.
microdosing question. So that sort of answers the microdosing question, I think, but there's a lot of people using really low doses, subclinical doses for other bits and pieces. And I think the data is still out on that. We don't have enough information to say anything concrete on that.
So, Pat, this may be a really strange question, but someone is telling us that at the end of their Monjaro pen, they still have liquid left over. I presume that's normal, but is there any way to get that liquid out and then get an extra dose out of it?
Yeah, so I think some people refer to this as the golden dose or something along those lines as well, is that there's an extra little dose. So you're supposed to sort of prime your pen, and I think a lot of the manufacturers, have taken that into account and they put a little bit extra into the pen. And then what people will do is they'll take this golden dose, which is an extra shot, and then their next dose. Um, no clinical studies behind it. I can't see anything really terribly bad with it. There's nothing wrong with the dose as long as it's, being kept safe within the fridge for that time. Just know that you are taking a bigger dose there before, so you might experience some side effects. But in general, you usually can get it out the normal way that you usually take a dose by clicking the pen and taking out and taking the injection, and then people add it to the next dose. But really, I don't think it's going to be a life-changing event for you. But some people, yeah, they think it's something extra.
So before I come on to our very last question of the evening, because we've been running for 2 hours, so just a huge thank you to both of our doctors for spending 2 hours with us and giving such amazing advice this evening, but also to the thousands of people who are still watching us tonight. Really grateful that you were able to be with us on this entire journey. So if you have a comment, a question, a thank you for any of our doctors, this would be a great time to put that into the comment section on Zoom, Facebook, and on YouTube, just to say thank you for the amazing webinar we've had this evening. But I want to maybe predict the future. They say fools and prophets predict the future, and I don't think either of you are going to be prophets. But when retatrutide is presumably approved, are we going to see everyone getting off their Ozempics and their Mounjaros and moving on to retatrutide? Is that the next step in the journey? That's question number one. And then question number two, do we think that this entire peptide world will become much more mainstream in the year or two to come? So let's start with the first question of, are we going to see this migration of Ozempic, Mounjaro onto retatrutide once it's approved and presumably available in South Africa?
I think my prediction is it's going to be prohibitively expensive, and I don't think that a lot of people will be able to do that in the first place. If it's extremely cost effective, then yes, I can't see people staying on these. I mean, provided it really depends. If they've lost the weight that they wanted, why would you change? But if you are on your journey, I think it would make sense to look into it as an option. So I think that's the answer to the first one. Is probably a few people, but most people will have to stay on what they're on because I just think it's going to be prohibitively expensive. And I think peptides are going to become a lot more mainstream. I think it started off as quite a fringe, and I think that a lot of things that have started off as quite fringe medical treatments that have ended up mainstay. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I do think that this is going to become far more regulated, and we're going to see a lot of people, we see this probably in discems and clicks and in various versions. But there's also specialists who are going to be using it a lot more mainstay for things like injuries and the rest of it. And I think there are a couple that already are. So those are my predictions for those two questions. Matt, your turn to also be part of the fools.
No, I think part of the fools. I worry about the cost. I think even if you look from like the migration from Ozempic to Mounjaro, watch for adverse effects. I think there'll be this fantasy reality that things will just be bigger and better. Sometimes bigger and better isn't, sometimes bigger and stronger isn't always better. So I would be a bit cautiously optimistic that there might be some unintended consequences of hopping onto a dose. So probably I would encourage my patients, if you're doing well, stay where you are. But I think in today's world, we all want the newest, fastest, loudest iPhone Pro Max generation 17, whatever we want. So I think there's going to definitely be a desire. I know lots of my patients will be asking for it. And yeah, my hope is peptides. I really want to see more legislation. I want us to see this being available. I want to see trial data. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting developments over the next couple of years of where we grow and how we accept research. I think was particularly with the use of AI and retrospective data. I think there's a lot of powerful learning that's going to take place for doctors. I'm really excited. We have a cool job. I love my job.
Well, I think technology's changed all of that, because maybe 20 years ago we went to the doctor and said, these are my symptoms, what do I have? And then we got Google, and then we started going to our doctors and saying, this is what I have, am I correct? And now we're going in with having used ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and we're going, this is what I've got. This is the proposed treatment. Do you agree? And can I have the prescription? And I think the next phase, and you're probably seeing it amongst your patients already, coming in with demands. These are the peptides I want to be on, and I need a prescription for that. And it's sometimes going to be quite difficult for a doctor to say, you're right, but you're completely wrong, because there's much more to life than just putting in a few prompts in artificial intelligence. And that's why we want to reiterate what we started with this evening. This was not medical advice. This was for information purposes only. And I think we've imparted an enormous amount of information this evening. Don't think of embarking on a journey without your medical professional. Whoever you trust, your qualified doctor is the right person to go talk to about this, to make sure that before you start anything, that you are properly and appropriately screened, that you are monitored continuously along this journey as you go, and that you have to get pure, proper medication and chemicals and peptides and GLP-1s. Ordering them off the internet from China is not your solution. And please take medical advice from people who have medical knowledge, not from people who are trying to sell you something on Instagram. With that, just a huge thank you to both Dr. Matthew O'Reilly and Dr. Patrick Bennett. If you want to contact any of them, just Google them. You will find Patrick's practice is in Parkdown North and Victory Park. You'll find Matthew's got two practices as well, one in Santon and one at, you told us, the renal clinic?
Joburg Academic Urology Center.
Joburg Academic, same parts of
just
the body,
rolls off the tongue.
Exactly.
Exactly. But I want to thank all of you, and we hope we've at least empowered you with enough information this evening to go and have a fully informed conversation with your doctor when the time is right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again on the 23rd, when, don't forget, we have Israeli journalist Amit Siegel, probably the most experienced political commentator and journalist in Israel. And we're going to be talking about Israeli elections. We're going to be talking about peace and war with Iran. We're going to be talking about Lebanon. We're talking about Gaza. We're going to be talking about Haredi secular fighting within Israel. All of that we're going to lay bare in what we call Meet the Press Israel edition, and that's 6 p.m. on the 23rd. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Really appreciate all of your time. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.